This happened about 5 years ago. I work at an upscale hotel in one of my state's most affluent suburbs. Like most hotels, we were struggling during the COVID virus. Our rates had been slashed in half to get guests through our door, and our clientele had shifted from upper-class business people to a mixed bag of characters. It was mostly fine, with a couple of notable exceptions, like this one night I worked. I was working overnight alone, 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. About 3 hours into my shift, I got a call from room 235. He had a strange voice. It was quite raspy, and he maybe even had an accent. He told me that he couldn't figure out how to work the remote to his TV. I assumed maybe the batteries had died, but he insisted that the remote worked fine, and he just didn't understand how to operate the volume button. I found this strange. I've worked in hotels for 5 years, and have never once encountered someone who didn't understand the TV remote. I gave him the benefit of the doubt though. Also, working in customer service, you come to realize that people are much dumber than you would want to believe they are. Since I was alone at the hotel and not technically supposed to leave the front desk, I told him that if he came down to the lobby, I would gladly show him how it works. This upset him. He grunted and started complaining that our customer service was terrible, and what kind of a hotel wouldn't have an attendant come to the room for something like this? I gave in, as he was only 1 floor up, and it couldn't possibly take that long to show somebody how to change the volume on a remote. Everyone was checked in for the night already, and it wasn't worth the argument over the bad review later. I told him I would be up in just a moment. I knocked on his door and did the customary call out, "Guest services." I could faintly hear him talking to someone, but it was muttered, and I couldn't pick up any distinguishable words. At first, I felt like he was instructing someone else to get the door, and I anticipated it to open shortly after. The talking went on for so long though that I wondered if maybe the people in the room hadn't heard me. I was debating knocking again when the deadbolt slowly unlatched. Normally, when I go to a room, the guest opens the door wide and stands to the side to let me in, or at the very least opens the door enough that I can fully see them and they can fully see me. Not this guy though. He barely cracked the door, opened it maybe only an inch. Even weirder, all the room lights were off. It was entirely dark except for the very faint glow of his TV, which was on, but the volume was turned all the way down. His voice sounded exactly like it had on the phone, raspy and whispered. He was standing behind the door, so I couldn't see him at all. Completely disembodied, he instructed me and said, "Come inside, sweetie." I said nothing and didn't move. I was a small 5-foot-tall woman with a baby face in my mid-20s. The man repeated, "Come on, come inside." He sounded more edgy and more insistent this time. It felt so obviously like a trap that if I wasn't absurdly on edge, I would have been insulted. How naive did he think I was? I pushed the door open, but remained as much in the hallway as possible. I also took the opportunity to reach for the light switch just inside the door. The lights came on, and I finally got a look at him. He was at least 60, white-haired and slim, and he was shirtless. He was wearing pants, but the belt was undone, and the ends were flopping down. I'm not entirely sure because I tried not to look, but I believe his pants were also unzipped. He appeared to be completely alone in the room, with the only piece of luggage being a small black duffel bag. I tried to explain the volume switch from where I was standing awkwardly in the doorway, but he wasn't comprehending it, or at least he was acting like he wasn't. I asked him to give me the remote so that I could show him, but he backed further into the room and said, "You know, it'll be easier for both of us if you just come inside." I was not going to step any further into that room, so I gave him one last description of where the volume button was on the remote and promptly closed the door. I felt like I was potentially going to be in harm's way while I was standing in the doorway and he was actively being a creep, so I left. I got downstairs to my lockable office with my security cameras, which would have allowed me to see him coming. I was just anxious and on high alert. I had decided that if he called again, I obviously wasn't going up, and if he came to the desk, I would have 911 punched into my cell phone just in case. The hotel is 2 minutes from the police station, and there's usually a patrol car hanging out in our shopping center. They show up quickly anytime I have to call. The man did end up calling me again that night about 2 hours later around midnight. He wanted me to come up to his room again. This time, I told him if he wanted help to bring himself and the remote to the front desk, and I was not going back up there again. Thankfully, he never came down to the desk, and he didn't bother me for the rest of the night. I live in a pretty populated neighborhood. Last year, I went to the fireworks at the city park nearby with some friends. Then I went back home and arrived at like 11 p.m. or so if I had to guess. It was fairly late, so I was pretty much just going to go right to bed. I went upstairs to my bedroom on the second floor. When I was doing this, I happened to glance out of a window. This overlooked part of the backyard. As I did, I saw this woman walking into the yard. Now, I had never seen her before, and some random person in your backyard is pretty weird, so I kept watching her and was hoping that she would leave. The woman then walked farther into my backyard and went out of my sight. She was heading for my back door area though. I moved and went to another window where I could see her. I watched her then go to the back door and try opening it. It was locked, thankfully. The thought occurred to me that perhaps the woman was drunk. Maybe she was at a 4th of July party and was trying to walk home or something. Probably she was just at the wrong house. She didn't really appear drunk the way she had been moving, but I was trying to be logical. So after trying the back door, she then knocked on a window. It appeared as though she was not going to leave, so I decided to let her know that she had to get off of my property. I walked downstairs. Just when I made it to the main floor though, I heard the sound of glass breaking. It was so startling that I instantly ran back up the stairs. Then I bolted from my room, went in, and locked the door. I heard footsteps downstairs, but it now sounded like there were 2 people. I heard a man's voice as well as a woman's, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I locked my bedroom door and then heard the footsteps approaching the stairs area. Then I heard the man start to shout really loudly. I don't recall exactly what he said, but it was very threatening. It was basically that he knew somebody was home and I better show myself now. I'm not sure if he really knew that I was home from hearing me go upstairs or to my room, or if he was just saying that to see if anybody was home. But I wasn't going to show myself. I went to my window and scrambled to open it. Then I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. I knew that I had to leave the house. I didn't have a weapon or really anything to defend myself with. I never thought that my house would get broken into. The footsteps sounded like they were heading straight for my door, so I decided to jump out of the window. It was kind of a long drop, but it was doable. I hit the ground, rolled, and was overall fine, so I took off running. I went down the street until I felt safe and then called the cops. I waited for them, and when they arrived, they searched the house. Unfortunately, the man and woman criminal duo were gone. I gave the police the best information that I could, and they took evidence. I had several things stolen, but nothing too bad. I'm just glad that I was safe and I made it out of the house okay. That was a really scary experience. I'm a 28-year-old male, and there's this girl that I work with who's 30 years old, and I've gone out with a few times. Well, after this one particular night, she invited me over to her house after a fundraiser we went to together to have a drink. I of course accepted. We sat in her living room and talked over a beer. It was a nice conversation, nothing weird at all, and no red flags that I saw. We mainly talked about people we hated from work and what had happened in the night previously. She asked if I wanted to go upstairs with her, and I agreed. She told me to go have a seat on the bed while she got ready in the bathroom. I honestly hadn't processed this information when I was going over to her bed. The only light on in the room was one from her bedside lamp. As I was scanning the room waiting for her to come out of the bathroom, I couldn't believe what I saw. There was not a single room decoration that wasn't clown-themed. I'm not talking goofy-looking clowns. All the decorations were the scary type of clown stuff. The ones that I took note of were a clown portrait on the wall near the bed, wearing a suit with a menacing grin, a picture of a clown playing golf, 2 statues on each bed that had clowns looking directly at the bed, and there were also several hand-drawn pictures of clowns, some on the walls, some in frames, and one that was probably the most disturbing to me was a very demonic-looking clown portrait that faced the bed. Since childhood, I've had an intense fear of clowns. I couldn't see how anybody could feel comfortable sleeping in a room like this, or even live in a home where a room like this existed. This absolutely destroyed my anxiety. I even started wondering if I was in danger maybe. I had notions in my head where I half expected her to come out of the bathroom wearing clown makeup, and that she would try to kill me. I had started mentally preparing for that and a possible escape if that were the case. Thankfully, that didn't happen, and she didn't want to kill me. Not the scariest of encounters, but it was a very creepy and unsettling event. My whole drive home, I couldn't even listen to music because of how weird I felt after seeing a bedroom that looked like that. I get people have strange hobbies, but that was just creepy to me personally. I'm still good friends with her, but I will never go back into that bedroom. Back when I was in my early to mid-teens, around 2007 or 2008, a bunch of friends and I would regularly hang out at an old abandoned school. It was a very small school with only 8 classrooms, a teacher's room, a cafeteria, and 2 bathrooms. And there was also one room that we had no idea what it was since it was always locked. The school hadn't been able to keep up with the growing town and the large number of newcomers that followed with it. The school was closed in favor of a newer and bigger school building by the end of the 1980s. Most of the place was boarded up completely, but you could enter through a window in one of the classrooms where the board had been ripped down. Our routine was always the same. Whoever of us got off school first would go down to the building and go through the different rooms to make sure that everything was empty and safe. The building had earlier been known as a local spot for drug addicts, and used needles was such a common sight for us at this point. So this one day, my friend and I were the first to get out of school, and per usual we took the walk down to the building. Upon entering and stepping out of the classroom and into the hallway, we immediately saw a large man. I remember him as quite huge, but that might possibly be how he appeared to us as kids. My friend let out a huge scream. The man did not appear shocked or scared. He didn't seem to react to us, but he turned to look at us and then spoke. He said one of our friends' names and asked if we had seen them. We told the guy that we hadn't seen anyone and only just got there, to which he sighed and shrugged. Then he pushed past us to leave the same way we had just entered. Now, our friend has an unusual name, so the chances that this guy was just looking for another random guy who just happened to have the same name were low. None of us had never seen this guy before, and I happened to know most of my said friend's family as well. We both described what the guy looked like to our friend, and he didn't seem to know who this guy could have been either. So for the next few months, we were too scared to go back. We didn't return until about 3 or 4 months later. It was the middle of summer vacation, and we thought that it would be fun to climb up on the roof of the building and sunbathe. Upon climbing it, we found the roof to be rather weak and close to caving in, but something made us take the risk and dare to venture out on the roof after all. There was a hole in the roof, and we figured the hole to be directly above the room that we had never been in. The hole in the roof was only about the size of a football though. One of my friends came up with the idea to lower her arm into the hole and film the room using her phone. Then we could see what the room looked like. She put her arm down, and as she was filming, she suddenly let out a blood-curdling scream. Then she immediately retracted her arm, without her phone though. She was certain that something had knocked it from her hand. As we looked down through the hole, we could see that her phone was laying on the floor. We climbed down from the roof and entered the building, now intent on doing whatever it took to get in the room. We didn't want our friend to have to return home without a phone and explain what happened to her parents. About 30 minutes later, we finally managed to make a hole in the door, put our hands inside, and open the door from the inside without any trouble. As we stepped inside, we all stared in silence at the room. To this day, I have no idea what this room was doing in a school building, and I sincerely hope that it was never used for what it looked like it was intended for. The room was small, and the floor and walls were solid concrete. In the left corner of the room when we entered, there were 2 metal bowls sitting on the floor, and in the back room there were 5 chains dangling from the wall. 4 of the chains had equal-sized handcuffs on them, and then there was one larger cuff that looked like it would fit around a neck. Needless to say, we swiftly picked up my friend's phone and immediately left the place. However, the room had us both scared and also slightly intrigued, so after some talk back and forth, we decided to go back and look at it again the following day. When we returned the next day, we found the door to be locked once again, and somebody had covered the hole we made in the door with a large wooden board nailed on the door. Once again, we immediately left, and after that visit, we never returned. I have no idea what we stumbled on that day, but I'm certain my days of hanging out at that place is what sparked my interest in abandoned places. Since taking up urban exploring, it's been a dream of mine to go back to that school and check out if that room was still there, but unfortunately the place no longer exists, and the area is now home to a thrift store. This is something that happened not too long ago. I live alone in an apartment building. I live not that far away from this dollar store that's down the street. One nice afternoon, I walked there because it only takes like 10 minutes. I was just getting a couple of things, and after arriving, I shopped around like normal. There were a few other people there, but I didn't pay any attention to them. I went around, got what I needed, and then paid for it. After leaving the store, I was going to walk back. Overall, things were pretty calm and quiet around the neighborhood. I started walking on the sidewalk to go back home. When I just passed the dollar store, I heard this car leaving, I think the dollar store parking lot. It turned, and it seemed like it was going to drive past me. However, it did not. Instead, it got really slow and then started driving even with me. I looked over and didn't recognize the car or the driver. Some guy was driving, and then he rolled down the window. Then he told me to get into his car. He did not seem friendly, but it was more like an angry command. Obviously, I was not going to do that. I asked who he was, and I walked faster. The guy kept up with me and kept insisting that I get into his car for some reason, but he didn't say who he was or anything. So at the next street, I took a left, even though I wasn't supposed to. The car took a left to keep up with me. I knew that he was just going to keep following me around at that point, so then I ran down the sidewalk and found an alleyway and then went down that. The car was not able to maneuver over there nearly as fast as me, so I ran down the alleyway and then I did what I could to get away from the guy. I thought that I had lost him, but really I hadn't. I went back to the sidewalk and continued my walk back home. But moments later I saw the car again and it was approaching me. The car caught up with me and I saw the same guy. This time I just ran backwards into some random person's yard. I didn't even care if they saw me or got mad or anything. I needed to get away from this guy. So I stayed in the yard and then crossed over into someone else's. This time I was more careful, and eventually I got back to a sidewalk again that led to my house. I walked the rest of the way back home to my apartment building. Then I got inside and went up to my place on the 3rd floor. When I did, I heard a car driving down the road out front that had been pretty quiet. I was curious if it was the same guy, so I looked out the window, and sure enough, it was. He parked the car on the side of the street, and then he walked up to the doors. Thankfully, the apartment building was locked and he couldn't get in. So then he turned around, walked back to his car, and then left. I couldn't believe how he went through that much effort to try to get me to go into his car. And for why? I don't know what could have happened, but I'm glad that I got away from him. I'm not sure if he had been in the dollar store at the same time as me or not. I really don't know, but it was very creepy. When I was around 10 years old, I had been invited to a sleepover for the first time at my friend's house. This friend, who I'll call Abby, lived far away from me, so us hanging out always felt like a special occasion. I had just started becoming brave enough to sleep away from my parents, and because she was one of my oldest friends, Abby's house was going to be one of the trial run sleepovers. Abby is the youngest of 4 kids, and her older brother, who is about 10 years older than us, has severe autism and continues to live full-time with Abby's parents. He's always a bit of a wild card, and I, as a 10-year-old girl, always felt a little bit anxious around him. Anyway, there were 3 of us girls at this slumber party. We decided to sleep on the main floor of her house so that we could stay up watching movies, and eventually we'd fall asleep. I had chosen the couch that was perpendicular to the wall of windows looking onto Abby's deck and backyard. The other girls had set up on the floor an air mattress. We put on a movie and we fell asleep quickly. Sleeping away from home has never been easy for me though. I wake up frequently and sometimes I can't fall asleep at all to begin with. This night was one of those times where after clocking a solid 2 hours, something stirred me back to consciousness. Coming to, I noticed the bright light of the TV glowing first before my eyes adjusted and noticed something outside that wasn't there before. It was a person, a man specifically. He was sitting on one of the deck chairs and had it positioned to face directly towards the 3 of us where we were sleeping. He hadn't noticed that I was awake, but seeing him made my heart race. I stayed totally still, watching him. It was dark, so his features were a bit ambiguous, but I could tell he was studying us and smirking. Terrified, I watched him for a few minutes before turning myself into the couch cushion and closing my eyes. Some time passed, maybe a few minutes, maybe half an hour, and finally I mustered up the courage to look again. He was gone. To this day, I have no idea who it was that had gotten into Abby's backyard and sat on her deck watching us in the middle of the night, but the image of him sitting there grinning still haunts me. For a while, I thought it might have been her brother who has autism, but this guy had dark hair and dark eyes, and her brother is blonde. Luckily, we all made it into the next morning unharmed, but that was the last time I ever spent the night at Abby's anyway. I've been using the deep web for a few years now. I usually use it only when I can't find certain ebooks on the regular internet. So this one time I was messing around and in the directory looking for useful dark websites. I found an online service site that claimed to deal in killers, weapons, and stolen things. Needless to say, I was fascinated with it. I've seen regular e-commerce websites, and I wondered how similar one that exists for mostly illegal activities would look. So as it loaded, I got a pop-up from the browser saying that it had prevented the website from using this function and that, and suddenly my webcam light lit up. It was basically like a bad jump scare for me. There I was trying to look at a website which is probably operated by some criminal organization, and for all I know they have my face stored away somewhere for reference in the compilation of future kill lists. I exited the browser and shut down my computer so fast. I was impressed at the speed which I did it in. That's how scared I was. This was in 2014, and I just avoided the dark web for the next 2 years until I needed it to download a book which I could not find anywhere else. Since that incident, I've never again ventured away from my ebook websites. In hindsight, it could have been and probably was something else because Google Chrome and Skype were both open as well. But you always get that ring whenever somebody Skypes you. And I'm mostly certain my computer was not on mute because I always listen to iTunes while on the internet or doing anything that doesn't have audio itself, so I continue to steer clear of any more exploring on the deep web. It was 2005 and I was in my very early 20s and lived alone in a big suburb of a large Midwestern city. My apartment complex had several buildings spread out, with some neighboring buildings facing mine. I worked full-time in retail and at the time partied a lot with my coworkers and friends, so I was constantly coming and going at all hours of the day and night. It was the start of the summer and I began noticing that as I came and went from my place, there would be a whistling in the distance, no matter what time of day or night. It always seemed to happen every time, either when I went to my car to leave or walked from my car to the building coming back. The sidewalk from my parking space to the front door was long, so it took maybe 90 seconds to get from point A to B, all the while being exposed to the open with no trees or obstructions in the view of that walkway. I was clearly visible to whoever this was. However, I could never see them. While the other buildings faced mine, they were a bit too far back to make out anyone in a window. All I could see were black squares, with the occasional moving of curtains in various windows peppered throughout the buildings. This went on throughout the summer for a couple of months. I began dreading every walk to or from my building. I could feel someone watching me from the minute I walked out of the front doorway. The whistles were loud, some long, some short, but they always happened. Girlfriends of mine who would visit never heard a thing when they walked to and from my building though. I started feeling like a target. I even tried parking behind my building rather than in front, but the whistler kept going. Finally, I walked out to my car one day and found a note on my windshield. It said something along the lines of, "I promise I'm not a creeper, but I've seen you around and I think you're beautiful. I'd love to get to know you. Here's my number." The note reiterated maybe 3 times that he wasn't a stalker or a creeper. I was immediately freaked out because I knew it was the phantom whistler and he'd been watching me come and go for some time. I took the note to the property office and showed it to the complex manager. She laughed it off and told me I should be flattered that somebody thought I was pretty and wanted to get to know me. I argued that it was terrifying to know that some unknown person was constantly whistling and watching me. She said that no other tenants had complained of similar incidents, so I should just chalk it up to a dude having a crush on me. I opted not to renew my lease when it expired at the end of the summer. No way was I going to keep giving rent money to a place that didn't take my concerns seriously. The whistler kept going until the day I moved out, and I can be grateful at least that the whistler didn't try anything bolder for the remainder of the summer. This happened in June in Asheville, North Carolina. My boyfriend, my dog, and I were camping along the Appalachian Trail along the river we were kayaking. We had gotten done kayaking for the day and were relaxing at our campsite before dinner. Our site was only 10 feet from the trail and the river was right beyond that. We had some swims and other dramatic and stressful events while kayaking that day and needed to unwind and relax. We were running low on weed, so we had just eaten some edibles because we're stoners and why not? My boyfriend was half asleep in his hammock that was at the river's edge, and I was laying on a towel near the tent when a man came walking up to us blabbing about giving us his trash. I was at first confused, but he was wearing a backpack and an Appalachian Trail t-shirt, so I quickly realized he was a serious hiker on the trail and wanted us to take his trash for him, which is a pretty reasonable request. However, we were only a 5-minute walk down the trail from where there was basic civilization, including a dumpster and whatnot, literally 5 minutes down the trail. I told him this because I was sure he would rather put it in the bin himself in that case. But then he pulled out a large bag of weed and said I could have some if I took his trash. I was a little confused, but would never turn down free weed, so I was like, sure, whatever, we'll throw your trash for you. He gave me a small handful of nugs and threw his trash into our bag. I asked him some small stuff like, oh, are you through hiking, and other basic stuff. He said he was and had been for a couple of months and asked if he could stay and drink a beer. I was like, sure. The guy seemed like he needed to talk to some people or something, and I wasn't doing anything. And he seemed normal enough, so why not? I did think he might only be there because I looked like a girl who was alone if he hadn't noticed the hammock. but I thought at most he would be mildly disappointed if he couldn't hit on me or whatever. My boyfriend popped his head up at some point, and the hiker did seem surprised to see him, which confirmed to me that he thought I was alone. He kept saying stuff like, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not one of those creepy people." Like, okay dude, I hope not. I was trying to be friendly and just ask basic questions about trail stories, and the guy was answering normal enough. My boyfriend and I decided to smoke some more weed, and of course offered the guy some because he had given us the weed in the first place. He hit it and coughed a bunch, and that's when stuff got weird. As a stoner, we were used to seeing people get too high and acting a little strange, but this guy was being incredibly strange. He talked and talked and talked, but it was so quiet we couldn't really hear a thing he said. I tried to seem interested and respond to stuff, but I had no clue what he was saying. He was just staring at the river talking to himself, and then occasionally looking at us like we were part of the conversation, and we'd be like, "Oh, right, haha." It was so strange and confusing. He also drank like 3 beers and smoked 2 cigarettes during the time, so it was not a short amount of time, and this man would not leave. He started talking to Siri on his phone when we stopped answering him, and he was yelling at Siri and calling her names. At one point, out of nowhere, he asked us, "On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I seem like a serial killer?" My boyfriend and I looked at each other like we both had the same thought, that this guy had just gotten way too creepy. We both nervously laughed and said, "Oh, 1, meaning not at all, and tried to act casual like it was just a joke or something, but we were both weirded out. After that, I said, "Nope, this guy is not welcome here," and I got in the hammock, and so did my boyfriend, and we sat there talking to each other a bit, not really acknowledging the guy. He said he was going to smoke 1 more cig and then leave, and I'm sure that was the longest cigarette I've ever witnessed in my life. It took him so long to finish it, and I was just watching it get shorter and shorter, hoping he would just leave already. He finally got up and put his stuff on and left, but it was almost dark, so we knew he would not go far before setting up camp for the night as well. That night we thought for sure the guy would come back to kill us. Throughout the night, people did walk by on the trail multiple times, but it was other people we had seen on the trail during the day. We literally planned what we would do if he came back, which was to grab the dog and jump into the river and float to the boat ramp downstream. Anyways, he didn't end up showing up that night, and we didn't see him again, but it was enough to really freak us out. It's possible this guy was just lacking some social skills and had been in the woods by himself for a while, but it's also possible that he had some really creepy stuff going on, and I'm glad that I wasn't alone when he walked up. This is my Craigslist horror story. I wanted to buy a TV from there last year. I saw an ad for a nice TV that looked pretty new. It was an LG, and the price was really good, a lot cheaper than you can get at the store. It was also a pretty new TV, and I figured that I would be getting a great bargain. So I reached out to the guy selling it and told him that I would buy it. He said okay and gave me his address and instructed me to come by the next night at 9 o'clock. It was cool with me, so I went over there the next evening. I arrived on time, and it was this sketchy neighborhood, but to be honest, mine isn't that much better, so I wasn't tripping or anything. I parked my car, got out, and walked up to the door and knocked. Within a minute, the door opened, and this dude with a t-shirt, jeans, and cap answered. I told him that I was there to buy the TV, and he let me in the house. He first asked for the money almost right away, which I had on me. I was about to give it to him, and I saw the TV sitting right there on the floor, but it was not the same TV from the ad. Most TVs look alike, so I was nearly fooled, but I've had quite a few TVs in my day, and I picked up on it. This one was slightly smaller than advertised, and it was also not the right brand. I was buying an LG, and I could see that this was some off-brand crap that probably didn't even work. If it did, the picture quality was probably terrible. I said, "Wait a minute, this isn't the right TV." I hoped that maybe the guy was selling multiple TVs and just got them mixed up, but he quickly said that this was the right TV and sounded almost angry. He told me to take it and started picking it up. I told him no, I don't want that cheap knockoff crap. The guy said a deal's a deal and started telling me to give him the money. I said no, the deal was for an LG, that's what was advertised. I then asked him straight up if he even had the LG TV that was advertised. The guy said that he didn't know what I was talking about and said this was the TV from the ad that he advertised the whole time. At that point, I just decided to leave. I told him he could scam somebody else and walked out the door. The guy started following me though, telling him to give him his money. I didn't see a weapon or anything, and I don't think he had one, at least I hope not. So I left the guy's house and went into his front yard to go to my car. The guy also left the house and started following me into the yard. At that point, I started running. I sprinted to my car, quickly unlocked it, and got inside. The man started running after me. I drove away as fast as I could. The guy ran all the way out to the street after me, but he wasn't able to quite reach me, thankfully. I went back home and looked at the ad again. It was still up, and it was still advertised as an LG, which was larger and not at all the same as the TV he tried to sell me. I'm glad I got out of there. Next time I buy something on Craigslist, I'm not entering anybody's house, and I'm not showing them any money until I see that it's not a scam. I work in a nursing home, and my schedule consists of days, evenings, and nights. It's a rough transition between days and nights, but everyone that works there has the same shifts, so we just get through them together. The building has about 100 residents with 3 floors, and is shaped like an L, with a north and south wing and the nursing stations in the middle. The 3rd floor currently only has a few residents living there due to construction, with one of the wings completely shut down because they're ripping out the walls. Due to only a few residents being on that floor, only one nurse is required to be on duty on that floor. I've worked the night shift alone on that floor many times, and never really experienced anything scary or weird. Sure, it's creepy and dark at night, but that was it. I've also never believed in the paranormal at all. I had the mindset that I had to see it to believe it. A few of my coworkers over the years had talked about how the 3rd floor was supposedly haunted, and they would hear knocks at night and see weird things. I was always intrigued to hear about it, but would always just laugh it off. But one night a few weeks ago has really started to change my mind. I was sitting in the nursing station watching movies and playing on my phone. I had just done my rounds and had answered a call bell. I had felt off that night and constantly had the feeling of being watched. I also kept on thinking that I was seeing things out of the corner of my eye. The next part is hard to explain, but I'll try as best I can. As I was sitting there, suddenly a shadow dropped from the ceiling and hovered over me, but by the time I realized what I was seeing, it was gone. My heart jumped, and I jumped out of my chair. There was no way that it would be a shadow from anything or a car passing by, as the only window looks out into the forest with nothing but trees for miles. After a few moments, I calmed down and left the nursing station to go check on my residents. Nothing seemed amiss, and none of them were awake, except for the little old lady at the end of the hallway watching her TV shows. As I walked back over to the nursing station, I was sure that I saw feet or a shadow moving under the crack of the door leading to the wing that was closed for construction. I opened the door just to make sure that it wasn't a wandering resident from another floor, which happens quite often, but there was no one there. I walked back to the nursing station freaked out, still feeling like somebody or something was watching me. I settled back into my chair and tried to watch TikTok videos to get my mind off of it. I was sitting with my back to the window facing the door. After about an hour of watching videos, I glanced at the clock. It was 3:03 a.m. I remember being slightly annoyed, as my coworker had promised to come up at 2:50 so I could have my break and go out to my car to have a smoke. Suddenly, I heard 3 knocks on the window behind me. I jumped up and looked out of the window and saw nothing there. Flight mode took over, and I just darted down the hallway, running into my coworker who was just coming up the elevator. Now, bear in mind I was on the 3rd floor, which is pretty high up. There was no stairway, tree, or ladder outside that window, so it was impossible for a person to be outside knocking on that window. I immediately asked my coworker if she knocked or heard any knocking, and she said no. She could see how shaken up I was and offered to switch floors for the remainder of the shift. I was very thankful, as being on the 2nd floor means you're with another nurse, so I wouldn't be alone. I went out to my car and had a few smokes just to try to calm down. I talked to the nurse on the 2nd floor, and she didn't seem too surprised. She's heard knocking up on the 3rd floor and had seen and heard weird things that she can't explain. A lot of people have died up there, and after that night, I honestly don't know what to believe anymore. I've never felt fear like I did that night, and I've since worked a few night shifts up there and didn't experience anything like that again. Could it be that I was just tired? I don't know, but I'll never forget how I felt that night. Last year, a few days away from Halloween, some friends and I were hanging out. After a while of us playing board games and video games, we wanted to go outside and play some night games. After about an hour of us playing some generic games, we decided to play Fugitive. For those of you who don't know what Fugitive is, there are 2 teams. One team goes and hides, and after a while they must make it back to a designated safe zone undetected while the other team tries to tag them. So the 6 of us split up into 2 teams and we went our separate ways. Me and 2 of my friends were the ones who were supposed to hide. One of us hid in a casket, It was a Halloween decoration near the safe zone. The other friend and I hid under the porch of where the seekers were counting. We waited for about 10 minutes and then decided to head to the safe zone that was just down the street. As we snuck down, we saw our friend sitting at the safe zone, which was at the front of his house, so we went over and started talking while waiting for the seekers to realize they had lost. Then, out of nowhere, this old car with chipped white paint pulled up to the house. My friend just thought that it was his sister's friend dropping his sister off, but nobody got out of the car. After 5 minutes, still nobody had gotten out. Man, we should have run away, but we just kept talking. After 5 minutes, we heard the car doors open, and then 2 guys came out of the car all dressed in black except for a white clown mask. As they were walking towards us, we tried to play it cool. We kept saying stuff like, "Hey, what's up?" or "What's going on?" Once they came up to us, they just kept staring at us. My friends and I kept trying to play it cool, but I could see it on my friends' faces. We were all scared. Then one of the clowns started just growling at us like some creepy animal or something, while the other one started talking to us saying creepy stuff like, "You teens shouldn't be out this late," or "You guys really should be more careful." He said this in the creepiest monotone voice also. I don't know why, but we were still trying to play it cool, and my friend said, "Let me get a picture of you." As he was about to take a picture, the clown quickly jerked his head forward as soon as the flash began. My friend only got a picture of his left eye and forehead. I also did something stupid and reached out my hand with a cough drop in it to give to the clown who had been growling, saying that he must have a raspy throat. As I was handing it to him, he grabbed my hand, but I was able to wiggle it free as soon as I could. Now I knew that these guys weren't afraid to grab us, which made us even more terrified. I looked behind us for a route to run. My only thought was that we had to kick the clowns in the crotch and then take off running. However, one of my friends finally said, "Please just leave us alone," and they surprisingly did. They started walking backwards, staring at us the entire way back to the car. They got in, and then they sped off. I just looked at my friends, and we couldn't say anything. We were all just terrified. After a minute, we saw our other friends, the Seekers, come around the corner. We went to our friend's house and told his dad, but he just laughed and said it was nothing. So we went to our other friend's house and told him what happened. His dad said he would drive us all home, even though we all lived close to each other. Then, later that night, after I was home, I heard a car pull up in front of my house. I looked outside, and it was the same old white car. I couldn't move, I was so scared. And then the passenger side window opened, and that same clown looked me dead in the eyes through the windows. The clown waved at me, and then the car sped off. I'm not even sure how they found out where I lived. They either followed us home, or must have already known who I was and where I lived. Even if they were just pranksters, it still scared the life out of me. A few years ago, we were hosting some family at our house for 4th of July. My wife and I live in a house that's in what I would describe as a nice neighborhood. We know most of the neighbors and they're good people. It's a great place to live overall. And that's one of the reasons that we like to have people over and host some of the events. On 4th of July, we had my brother and his wife, as well as my sister, my parents, and 2 cousins. We had a grill outside and a couple of tables in the yard where most of the people were hanging out because it was a nice day. But we also had some food inside as well, and people were going back and forth. The 4th of July party started in the early afternoon. At one point, a couple of hours in, pretty much everybody was outside. Our house is on a corner, so we sort of have 2 front yards in a way, if that makes sense. One is really a side yard, but it's also fairly large and is connected to the street. The backyard is fenced in, but the front area is not. So I went into the house and into the kitchen. I was washing my hands at the sink, and there's a window right there looking out to the side yard. At that point, most of the people were in the front yard, but my brother was there in the side yard getting another drink. At that point, I remember noticing this random guy walking into the side yard from the street. I had no idea who he was or where he had come from. He approached my brother and then started talking to him. The windows were closed and the air conditioning was on, so I couldn't hear what was said. The man was holding what looked like a small toolbox in one hand. Within a few seconds, he and my brother started walking around to the back side of the house. I decided to go out and see what was going on, so I left out the front. I went around through the side yard and then around back, but by the time I got there, my brother was returning without the man. I asked him who that guy was that he was with. My brother said it was my neighbor and he was stopping by to return my tools. I asked if he was gone. My brother said no, the guy had gone into the basement to return the tools. I told my brother that that guy was not my neighbor and I didn't lend tools to anybody. My brother suddenly had a look of shock on his face and then said that the man was inside my house. He had let him in the back door, which had stairs leading down to the basement right by. So at that point, we both ran to the back door and went inside. When we got in, the man was nowhere in sight. The door to the basement was closed, and I opened it. All the lights were off down there. I called down asking if anybody was there, but we got no response. We didn't have any kind of weapons or anything on us in the moment, and I didn't think to get one either. I turned on a light to the basement, which wasn't very bright, but better than nothing. Then we both walked down the stairs. When we got down there, the basement, which was unfinished, appeared mostly empty. It was some old furniture and boxes scattered around. There were also some shelves and things like that. We started looking around, not saying a word. I was pretty nervous. After both of us looking around for maybe a minute or two, we had still seen nothing. But then we heard a noise coming from one wall. I looked over just in time to see a shelf being pushed over. The man was behind it. Several things fell off the shelf in front of me, and I moved back just in time. The shelf tipped over completely and still hit me and grazed my brother, but it could have been a lot worse. It could have completely crushed us. As we were getting out of the way, the man moved out and started running. He ran to the stairs and then went back up. We got up to our feet and ran after him. The man then left the house. We ran after him in case he went around front, but instead he went to the street and quickly disappeared. We ended up calling the cops and moved the 4th of July party to inside the house. The cops searched the area looking for the guy but couldn't find him. I'm still not sure who he was or why he went to our house. Was he someone who lived nearby? I know all the neighbors in the immediate area, and he wasn't one of them. But overall, the neighborhood is very large. I haven't seen the guy since, and I'm hoping that I never do again. Back in the 1980s, in the small town where I lived, there wasn't really a lot to do. A group of us kids formed, and we would make our own adventures every weekend. I was around 15 years old at the time, and the 7 other kids that I hung out with were around the same age. One weekend, we all met up at a nature trail to just walk and joke around. As we were walking along the trail, somebody mentioned that there was an abandoned honor farm not too far from where we were. An honor farm is basically like a prison farm where inmates would live and work. We all thought that it was a good idea to go there and check out this scary and mysterious abandoned building. We walked for about a mile when we reached it. We had heard stories of scary stuff that had happened to other people at the honor farm, and therefore I was excited to explore it, as some lore had been built around it in our town. We arrived at the notorious building, and we all ran inside and split up as we explored it. My very best friend and I headed up the concrete stairway to the 2nd floor. When we were inside, we noticed that there was graffiti splattered all over the walls, so we knew that many other people had also been there exploring. We came to this one room that was completely dark, and we stood outside the doorway because we were too afraid to go in. At this point, 2 other guys from the group showed up, and we dared them to go in. One of the guys looked at us and rolled his eyes, and then just walked into the room as he felt along the wall to guide him. He was in the room for what seemed like a few minutes. Suddenly, he jumped out with a scary boo as we all jumped backwards and then laughed at what he had done. At that moment, he looked down at his hands, and they were covered in what looked like blood from when he dragged his hand on the wall to enter the room. "It's probably red paint," I said, but I saw that he appeared scared, and I suggested that we go back down to the 1st floor. All 4 of us ran back down the stairs, and we met the others in the hallway right off the staircase. One of the guys in the group was a joker. We all told him about the red gunk on the guy's hands from that room in the 2nd floor, and he started to joke about it as we all laughed. As everybody was standing there and listening to the guys joke around, I turned towards the main foyer that was just feet away from where we were standing. As I looked, I suddenly saw a man walking through the foyer. He walked at an angle, sort of left to right with confident strides. He was very tall, and he didn't even turn and look at us. He was wearing a long overcoat that had a hood that was pulled up over his head. He was well dressed and wearing nice shoes. I don't remember why I noticed his shoes, but I took note of them. He just walked from where I could see him, and then he was out of my view. I interrupted the guy who was talking, and I told him what I had just seen. Everybody then looked in that direction, but nobody could see the man. We all decided that we should leave, and we started heading back to the area where we had been dropped off by our parents. As we walked, we forgot all about the possible blood on the one guy's hands and the man that I had seen. We were just joking around and having fun as we walked back. That night, I spent the night at my friend's house. They had a rabbit pen in their backyard with several adorable rabbits that my friend's mother had taken in and fed after they were abandoned as babies. The next morning, we got up and went into the kitchen where my friend's dad told us not to go out into the backyard. We pressed him as to why we couldn't go back there, and he told us that somebody had come into their yard that night and cut off the heads of all the rabbits. He said the strangest part was that there was no blood at all. It was almost as if somebody drank the blood right after chopping their heads off. Right away, I knew that somebody had followed us from the Honor Farm, and that same person, or whatever I had seen, had been the one who had killed the rabbits like that. Something was seriously up with that place. It has since been torn down, and nothing remains of that old building. There were so many scary stories coming out of that place that the city decided to level it. After experiencing it myself, I believe that all the stories I had heard about the abandoned Honor Farm were most likely true, and that there had been some sort of pure evil associated with that building. This is the story of the only time that I've ever went to Dollar Tree. It was years ago now. Up to that point, I just never really lived close to one, and when I was younger, my parents never went there or anything. So when I got older, it was never part of my routine to go to Dollar Tree. I was always kind of curious about it though. Finally, one time, there was one not far away from the apartment that I lived in at the time. I needed to get a few things, and instead of going to my normal store, I decided to go to the Dollar Tree. I wanted to see for myself how the quality of the products were and also how much money I would save by going there. So I drove from my apartment to the local Dollar Tree, which was less than 10 minutes from my place. I arrived at night and parked in the quiet parking lot. It was not super late, but definitely after the afternoon and evening rush. So I got inside the store and it was very quiet there as well. I didn't really see any other people around the store shopping. I got a basket and started going around the store seeing what they had. Overall, there was a good selection, but not a lot of the usual brands that I would get. In the midst of looking around though, I was in the store for maybe 5 minutes before something weird happened. I was in an aisle looking at stuff, and this woman entered the aisle as well. I did not look at her, but it was like I could feel that she was looking at me. But I didn't look over at her still, and I just kept looking at the products. When I was done in that aisle, I moved to the next one, and when I did that, I finally looked over. I saw the woman, and she appeared to be looking at me still. So I went to the other aisle and continued shopping, where the woman soon joined me. She didn't get that close to me, but kept a distance. The woman was sort of short, appeared to be around 40 or so, and had dark hair with a lot of volume. So I just ignored her really, but it seemed like everywhere that I went, she would trail behind me a little ways. I didn't know why this was, but I didn't really want to confront her. So instead, I just ignored her really. After a long time of this though, it was getting annoying. Soon enough, I was done shopping and I went to check out and leave. I was wondering if the woman would continue to seemingly follow me. But when I got to the checkouts, I couldn't see her anymore. So I paid for all my stuff and then I left. I went to my car in the parking lot and put my things inside, and then I got in the car. Right as I started my engine, I saw another car that was in the parking lot driving. I wasn't sure where this car had been, if it was arriving at the Dollar Tree or leaving, because I hadn't been paying attention. But it was approaching my car, so I waited to back out until it passed. However, the car turned, and now it was driving straight for me. The next thing I knew, this car drove right into the back of my car, rear-ending me. It really wasn't that bad of a crash, and I wasn't injured or anything, but it was extremely surprising. Then the car that hit me started to back up. When this was happening, I saw the driver. It was the same woman who had been following me around inside the store. That really shocked me. What was this lady's problem? After crashing into my car and then backing up, she quickly drove off. I stayed and called the police. I didn't have the lady's license plate, obviously. When the cops got there, I could only tell them what I knew. My car was damaged pretty good in the back. Thankfully, insurance covered it. But it was found out later that the woman had been driving without a license and the car wasn't even hers. But that doesn't explain her strange behavior. My best guess is drugs. Years back, I had an old Impreza that was my car. I got a new car, so I decided to sell the Impreza on Craigslist. This was before Facebook Marketplace was popular, and to me, Craigslist seemed like the best option for getting the most money I could for my car. If I traded it into a dealer or a dealership, I would probably get next to nothing, and I already had another car. So I took some pictures and then listed it online. The way Craigslist works, or at least worked back then, was you would create a simple listing and your phone number would be at the bottom. Anybody could contact you about what you were selling, either a text or a call. So the first few days after I made the listing, I wasn't getting much interest. The car was sort of old, but it worked fine and ran well. I thought that maybe the asking price was too high, but I kept the listing up and didn't change the price because I wasn't in a huge hurry to sell. I did get, I think it was 2 texts and 1 call, but each time they stopped responding pretty quick and never seemed that interested. Then, after the car had been up for like a week, I got another text about it. The person said, "Is your Impreza still for sale?" I said, yes it is. Then the person said that they were interested in it. I asked if they wanted to look at the car and maybe test drive it, and the person said yes. So I asked when to try to arrange a time. I knew nothing about this person because they didn't give me a name or anything. However, after I asked when they wanted to look at the car, they stopped responding. For several days, I got no texts at all. I was disappointed and figured that they just lost interest in the car for whatever reason. For the next few days after that, I got no texts or calls regarding the car. I was starting to forget about it because, like I said, I wasn't in a huge hurry to sell it. So now it was like a week after I had last heard from the person, or anybody else for that matter, about my car. I lived alone at the time in a smaller house that I was renting. It was nighttime, sort of late, about 10 o'clock, and I was in the living room. I got a text, and it was from the same person who had been texting with me about the car. He sent a picture of the car for sale as it sat in my driveway right by my house. This was not the picture from the Craigslist listing. This looked like a picture that had been taken about right now. The place that the person had taken the picture from was well in my driveway and on my property. I looked at the picture and was very confused. I finally texted back and said, "Are you at my house right now?" Pretty quickly the person responded saying, "I'm here to look at the car. Where are you?" I knew that I had never arranged the details of a time or date to look at the car with this person. I also realized that I had never given them my address, and it wasn't on the listing either. Plus, it was late at night for crying out loud. I asked the person how they got my address. They did not respond to this. Moments later, I heard a knock at the front door. I was not within view to see the door or out any of the windows. Plus, they were thankfully all covered entirely. I was curious as to who was there, but I didn't really want to open the door. I stood there trying to decide what my best option was. Then the person tried opening my front door, which was locked. I tried calling them on the phone, but they declined the call. The knocking at the door got louder. By now, I was really creeped out. I went over to a front window and very carefully looked out of it. I saw some guy standing there on the front step. He was sort of large, but I couldn't see his face. It was really dark out, so I didn't get much. Then, finally, he turned and started walking away. I moved away from the window again so that he wouldn't see me. A short time later, I heard a loud noise, like something was being hit. Then I heard a car driving away down the street. I went and looked out the window, and he was gone. I went to text the guy again asking what that was all about, but he blocked my number. The next day, I went outside and saw a visible dent in the door of the Impreza. I'm pretty sure that the guy kicked it or hit it somehow, and that's the sound that I heard before he left. It made me angry, and I reported his number to Craigslist. This incident prompted me to get security cameras. It also made me remove my Craigslist listing, and I ended up selling my car to a dealer. Since that experience, the man never returned. I have used Craigslist a couple of times since, but not much, and not to buy or sell a vehicle. If anybody out there listening uses Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace, please be careful. I was 19 at the time this took place. I was a Marine, and I was on my first deployment to Afghanistan. Not too far from my platoon's patrol base was this structure that looked like a castle. Through interpreted conversations with locals, we were able to determine that they believed it was built by Alexander the Great. Whether this was true or not, I will never know, but this place did look ancient. So being Marines, we did the only thing that we thought was prudent at the time. We went out on patrol with the intent of setting up an observation post inside this structure. We took our Afghan border police with us. When we got close to the structure and our Afghans figured out what we were up to, they refused to go any further. Before they left, they kept repeating the same word over and over. I don't remember what the word was in their language, as this was a decade ago and there's no way I can remember that. But what I do know is that they were trying to warn us of evil spirits. We went in anyways, without our Afghans, with the intent of staying there overnight. This place was basically an ancient fort with mud or clay brick walls on 4 sides, with a building in the middle. So we set security, made sure we had comm checks with our patrol base, and that they had an updated position report on us so they knew where we were in case we got into trouble. Darkness fell, and not long after, I went up to take my turn on the wall with my friend. Our job was to watch for anyone that might be trying to sneak up on us or any other Taliban-related shenanigans. Not 20 minutes into our shift was when weird stuff started going down. The entire time there on the wall, I felt like I was being watched from all sides. I turned to see a figure walking along the wall not too far from where we were sitting. I say walking, but it was a robed figure that looked to almost be floating. I turned to my friend to see if he too saw what I did, and he was getting his night vision back on, which was turned off as it was his turn to rest, and when he looked, the figure was gone. We didn't see anything else after that for the rest of our shift. We uneasily finished and went to rest, where I ended up dozing off at some point. I don't know what happened next, but I awoke to a completely black figure literally squatting on my chest. When I went to yell for help, nothing came out, and it was like I had a hand over my mouth. I reached for my knife since I was a machine gunner and I couldn't just grab my machine gun, and I felt like something was pinning my arm to the ground. I tried to squirm free and couldn't move, so I bit down as hard as I could on what felt like a hand in my mouth. At this point, whatever weight was on me instantly disappeared and I could move and talk again. By that point I was freaking out, and my brothers who were around me saw me. My training had kicked in, and I was trying my best to keep quiet and not pass out because I was hyperventilating. My squad mates calmed me down, and after telling them what happened, they all admitted to having the creeps. They also admitted to the feeling of being watched the entire time we were there. None of us could sleep, and we all basically sat back to back for the rest of the night when we weren't on watch. We were pretty freaked out, and so every noise and rustle in the wind made it even worse in the total silence of that ancient fort in the ancient desert. If you haven't experienced the silence of an open desert in a part of the world where there's absolutely zero light and noise pollution, then I suppose it can be hard to understand this. But any noise in a place like that in the middle of the night, in total darkness when you're already alert to sounds of the enemy, is just about the scariest thing anyone can ever experience. I will never experience that kind of fear in my life again, ever. As soon as the sun came up, we left. Everyone was scared, and none of us spoke about it again to each other, as many other patrol that night also had strange unimaginable encounters happen to them. We never went back to that area again, and didn't make it a permanent observation post for obvious reasons. I still suffer from nightmares and sleep paralysis because of my personal experience that night. The scariest part of this whole thing is that I know it was probably just in my head what happened while I was sleeping, but it felt very real. I've always been good friends with one of my cousins, Cole, who's the same age as I am. The two of us are close, and we always did get along very well together, and were often found together both in school and outside of it. When we were 12 and in the 6th grade, I was hanging out with Cole one Friday afternoon around the later part of May. We were psyched for the start of the weekend. We wound up at his house since he didn't live that far from me. At one point, my mom called to say that our grandpa was in the hospital. While the issue with our grandpa wasn't expected to be life-threatening, he was kept at the hospital overnight for observation. So both my parents and Cole's parents were planning on staying with him and Grandma at the hospital. I was told that I was going to stay at Cole's house for the night, with Cole's 15-year-old brother Hunter being in charge while our parents were out. We ordered out for pizza and enjoyed our night. At around 9 or so, there was a knock at the front door, and Cole went to answer it. I was a bit curious as to who it could be at that time of night, and so I watched from a ways back. At the door were two older guys. They said that they were with the city and they had been investigating reports about the water pressure supposedly being bad in the neighborhood. They asked Cole if his parents were home, and Cole said they were unavailable at the moment. The guys started asking a bunch of questions about how the water pressure was in the house and if they could come inside to check. Hunter came over at that point and politely told the guys that the water pressure was fine, and perhaps they should move on to check out other homes in the neighborhood. The guys seemed reluctant to leave, but turned and walked away after Hunter started closing the door. After the door was shut, we looked at each other and shrugged, but didn't think too much of it after that and went back to what we were doing. Eventually, we decided to go to bed. Cole and Hunter shared a bedroom, and we all agreed that I would sleep in there with them rather than me sleeping on the couch or something like that. They climbed into their beds, and I quickly crawled into the sleeping bag that they had given me. After talking for a while about random stuff, we eventually fell asleep. Early the next morning, I got up because I had to pee, so I quietly got out of the sleeping bag and went and did my business in the bathroom. On the way back to the bedroom, I heard something in the family room. This was at the opposite end of the house from the bedrooms and the bathroom that I was using. I didn't pay too much attention to it at the time, thinking it must be Cole or Hunter, until I got back to the bedroom and I realized that they were both still in there. Trying not to panic, I woke them and told them that I thought someone was in the house. They quietly followed me, and the moment we walked into the family room, we saw two guys from the night before in there, and it was rather clear that they were robbing the place. One of them started moving towards us as he pulled out a wicked-looking knife. The three of us promptly raced to the front door and somehow managed to get it unlocked and open, and we fled outside. As luck would have it, a cop was driving by at that particular moment. We quickly flagged him down and told him about the guys in the house. The cop called for backup, and within a couple of minutes several other cops were there and they proceeded to enter the house, and after some searching they caught the two guys. The cops figured that the two guys must have entered from a window in the laundry room that had a broken latch. They had probably targeted our house because while it wasn't empty, they'd probably realized that there were no adults there, and they figured that if we discovered them, we could be more easily dealt with than adults. It was a bold move by the robbers that they ended up paying for. Let me start this off by saying that it's very imperative that you stay off the dark and deep web. No matter what anyone tells you, no good can come from using it, and I'm about to tell you why. I was 15 at the time. I had come home from school on a Friday afternoon, ready to relax, kick back, and enjoy the short break. I had started using code about a year prior. Nothing too fancy, just basic stuff, and I was practicing it daily. Now, I had known about the dark web before this took place. I would sometimes buy weed off it, but that was the extent. This day, however, I decided to venture farther and really look at the dark web. I'm sure that a lot of people are familiar with this iceberg diagram representing the internet's content. For those who don't know, the surface web contains about 10% of the internet's content, while the deep and dark web take up about the other 90%. I was ready to see what it really held. I heard stories about what goes down on the deep web, murder, inhumane torture, all that stuff. But I really didn't believe that they were all legit, so I hopped on and began to see what I could dig up. Really, I was just curious. I started off by browsing through various websites, most of which contained illegal things, such as drugs, hackers, and hitmen for hire. I clicked on a random forum link which took about a minute to load. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was a forum where people could pick a topic they wanted to talk about, such as politics, dealing with mental health, and really whatever. There was one link that caught my eye though. The link was in all red and the rest were black, and it said, "Not for the weak, enter at your own risk." Curious as to what it was, I clicked the link, and it brought me to a forum that only had one link on the whole page. I clicked this link, and it brought me to a chat room. I realized that nobody was saying anything in it, only sending links. This set off alarm bells in my head, because I had ideas of what these could possibly be. I wish I had listened to my instincts, which were telling me that I should get off right away. However, the ignorant, curious teen took over me, and I started setting up some protection for myself using the code that I had learned. I later realized this amateur coding I did would not protect me from these advanced people with malicious intent. I clicked on a random link, and a page loaded surprisingly fast. It looked to be another chat room. I went to type hello or something, but it would not let me. I sighed and began moving my mouse to go to the previous page when a noise went off. I had received a chat. The message said, "Hello, new user, I see you have found my site. Would you like to continue?" I tried typing again, but still couldn't. The next message sent chills down my back, and my hands are shaking just recalling it. It read, "No, son, not the keyboard." I tried turning off my computer, but of course, nothing worked. Another message popped up saying, "I guess I'll take that as a no." The screen suddenly changed, and a video began playing. It was a black screen, but I could only hear a deep male voice say, "Unfortunately for you, you do not have a choice." I grabbed a sticky note and put it over my webcam, and the voice on the screen said, "Ah, so we're playing games now, huh?" The video then began to change, and I realized that the man was taking his hand off the camera. He was a short man, but that brought me no comfort. He held up a knife and said, "Name any body part." I then for the first time noticed a cloth in the corner of the room covering something up, which I could only assume to be a body. I rushed to unplug the computer as fast as I could, and I laid on the floor panting for hours until I could finally get up. I now suffer from anxiety, and to anyone else who decides to use the deep web, be safe out there. When I was a teenager, my friends and I used to quite frequently go to abandoned buildings of different sorts. This hobby got worn out for me personally, but when I was at my first or second year of university, I noticed a weird, not too big abandoned building very close to the university. My university is located pretty much downtown. The specific area is very crowded and filled with elite properties, stores, and historic buildings. So it was weird seeing the abandoned building standing weirdly in some sort of yard or courtyard between other buildings. I grabbed my friends, there were 4 of us, and we decided to check it out. We went there late at night so there would not be any more eyes on us than necessary, and it was also winter. We grabbed our tools and broke a lock to one of the entrances, but it was a dead-end small room. It was creepy with a wheelchair standing there. We then found another door to the building. It was locked more heavily, we could not break the lock itself, so we somehow managed to make a big hole in the door so everybody could just climb in there. It was very loud obviously, so after we did it, we decided to wait a bit before going inside in case somebody had called the cops on us. After an hour spent at the nearby McDonald's, proud of how we had handled that super locked door that seemed to haven't been open for years, we decided to go in. The building felt empty and damaged, and there was not much stuff in there besides concrete walls and a lot of trash which we thought was old. There was no light in there at all as every window was blocked off and locked also. It's creepy to think back on this decision, but the first thing that we decided to do was to go to the attic, all of us. It was more of the same, a lot of trash, some graffiti, and generally nothing too interesting. Then we decided to come back to the floor we started from and check it out properly. While we were there, one of us decided to go across the hall, and we could see him clearly with a flashlight, checking out some sort of shack that was located by some piles of trash at the end of the hallway. He looked inside and then rushed back to us very concerned. He said that there was a body inside. We all thought that it was a dead person because the building was locked, and we didn't even process that someone could be living there somehow. We felt like somebody had died, and we wondered how we would report it to the police without getting in trouble for breaking into the building. The discussion could not be continued, because then we actually saw someone coming at us, a mere silhouette. We lost our minds from this, and we rushed to our door hole, which was not perfect for anyone to climb through in such a rush. While making it out, this person shouted something angry at us with a rather unsettling voice, and was mad at us for breaking the door. We were all so scared because of how unexpected that was. We all assumed that there could not be anybody locked in an abandoned building that was out of use for so many years and partially damaged. We never thought to ourselves that maybe it was not the city that had locked the building up, but maybe somebody had managed to privatize the locks. A scary experience probably for both our friend group and I'm assuming the homeless guy who woke up to us right near him, and what we later found out used to be a private hospital. I worked at a dollar store for a while. This was years ago now. Sometimes shady characters would come in from time to time. I was never too worried though because nothing ever really happened. But one time I was working by myself one evening. The dollar store would be closing soon as it was approaching 10 p.m. I was the only one working and by myself. Typically this time of night was very quiet and we hadn't had any customers come in a while. I had checked out a customer maybe 10 minutes prior and nobody else had entered the store since. So I was all by myself up at the checkouts. I was just on my phone, bored and waiting to get off of work. But it wasn't too bad, the fact that I could just sit there and play games on my phone and stuff. I was completely fine with nobody else being there. It was very quiet inside the store for a while, only the small sound of the low volume from the game that I was playing on my phone. Then, out of nowhere, I suddenly heard a sound. It was coming from somewhere in the store. It sounded like something had fallen off a shelf. The way that it broke the silence kind of spooked me, and I felt a little nervous. I looked in the direction but couldn't see anything. Our dollar store was about an average size for one, so the store wasn't that big. However, I could only see a few aisles, and there were many places that were out of my sight. After looking in the direction for a little while, I still couldn't see anything. I didn't hear anything else now either, so I stayed where I was. I chalked it up to maybe just an item that was placed too close to the edge of a shelf or something. I continued with my game, but I'm not going to lie, I was a little bit nervous now. Then it happened again. I heard another item fall off a shelf seemingly. This time I knew something was up. I looked over, but this was out of my sight as well, so I got up and decided to investigate. I was pretty nervous, but I made my way over towards where I had heard the noise. As I quietly walked, I didn't hear anything else at all. I got closer, and soon I saw what fell. There were 2 products in the same aisle that had fallen down. Nobody else appeared to be inside of the store. I looked at where the items had fallen from, and I had no idea how they could have fallen on their own. So I put them back, and then I started to walk around the store. As I was doing so, I heard another noise. Something fell from a shelf on the other end of the store way out of my sight. Now I was super creeped out. I called out, asking if anybody was in the store. There was no answer. I slowly walked over to where this next noise had come from. When I got to that aisle, I saw something else on the ground. I didn't see anybody though still. I looked around and then called out again, asking if anybody was there. Still nothing. Now I was in the far back corner of the store, and at that point I suddenly heard the sound of footsteps. It was not very loud, and I could only barely hear it, but it sounded like somebody running. They were making their way up towards the front of the store. I started walking over there. By the time I got within view of the front, I actually saw somebody. There was a man up at the check lanes, specifically the one that I had been at. I really couldn't believe it. I had no idea that anybody else had been in the store. The man was trying to get into the cash register at my check lane that I had been working at. Thankfully, I had locked the cash register because I hadn't used it in a while. It was a habit for me to not leave it unlocked. The man saw me come into his view. He continued trying to open it and then tried picking it up and then started banging on it. He looked over at me and I kept my distance but yelled at him to stop. The man didn't say anything. Then he jumped up and moved to another register. That one was also locked. They all were. I yelled that I was calling the police and then I got out my phone. The man messed around with that one for a while and then he got up and ran away. He left the store running off into the night. I quickly went over to the doors and then locked them. We were closing early now and I didn't care if anybody else showed up. Then I waited for the police. When they got there, I spoke with them, giving my account of what happened and so forth. They said that they would go look for the man. After that though, I don't think he was ever located. He didn't come back to that store though, I know that. He must have been really good at keeping quiet, because I had no clue that anybody had been inside the store. I'm not sure when the man got there or how he stayed out of my sight for so long. That was the scariest experience from working at the dollar store though. This happened in the summer of 2020. I was 20 years old at the time and had gone on a trip to Moab, Utah with my best friend since high school, Kendall. We had last minute joined her family's trip celebrating her sister's high school graduation. We lived a few hours by car from Moab, which had just reopened after being closed to the public due to COVID. They had plans to go skydiving and we were excited to tag along. Our plan was to drive separately, stay the night on the couch of her family's Airbnb, then go skydiving with them, and then stay the last night at a small cabin in a campground right outside of town, just the two of us, as our added adventure. We had never been on a trip as adults staying on our own, and were excited to have the independence. We had a great trip down there, as well as a fun first night with Kendall's family. We all went skydiving in the morning early. After Kendall and I had a huge adrenaline rush, we decided to go for a hike to the watering hole. There we explored, and even did a small cliff jump into the water. By the end of the day, we were exhausted physically from our activities and from the rush and now drop of adrenaline. We had checked into our campground, which was about 10 miles from the town. There was a general store at the mouth of the property with somewhat unfriendly older cashiers to check us in, but we didn't think much of it. The campground was made of different sections for tents, RVs, and small cabins. When I say small cabins, I mean room for 2 twin beds and a chair and hardly anything else. We stayed in one of those. Like I said, Moab had just reopened to tourists, so besides us, we saw one other family of 3 staying in the entire campground. We also noticed that we didn't have cell phone signal at the camp. By nightfall, we could hardly move our bodies, we were so sore, and we spent about an hour in camp chairs under the stars drinking. We decided to call it a night and grabbed our lantern to head to the communal bathrooms to wash our faces. We made our way to the bathrooms, giggling through the pitch dark with our light. We reached the hut that held the 4 separate bathrooms. Each had a shower directly across from the door, and a toilet and sink against one side wall. We swung the door open, eager to get out of the dark, and flipped the light switch on. I entered the room first, and immediately stopped in my tracks. Kendall stopped in the doorway. We were both silent. There was something off. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like an intense feeling that something was wrong. We started forward at the shower, which had the curtain half down closed. There was some kind of short stepping stool in the middle of the shower, with the front 2 legs poking out from behind the curtain. My eyes started to rise, and I could just make out the faint silhouette of a person standing on the stool behind the thin curtain. We stood there frozen in shock, confusion, and disbelief. We were trying to figure out without getting any closer if there was really a person behind the shower curtain or if we were seeing something else. Suddenly, Kendall pointed at something, and I looked to my right where the sink was. Propped on the sink against the mirror was an iPhone with the screen facing us. The camera was out and recording. That snapped us out of our trance, and we both turned around and basically ran back for our cabin. We locked the door and tried to figure out what we had just walked into. We couldn't call anybody because we didn't have any signal, and this was our first time staying somewhere new on our own. We had been drinking, and we didn't feel confident that either of us could drive through the rocks and sharp turns and make it back to the highway. We turned the lights off because I couldn't get the image out of my head of somebody looking through the small window on the door leading to our cabin. We were all alone in this campground, completely exhausted physically from our skydive and hiking. I know it sounds dumb, but at the time we were so confused and tired, we just decided to go to sleep and leave the first thing in the morning. We pushed our beds together and laid there in the dark in silence. I started to think about the staff who worked at the campground, and if they, knowing it was almost empty, had been the one in the bathroom, or if we were just mistaken in what we saw. About 10 minutes into laying there, Kendall said, "You know what's weird?" I froze, waiting to hear something to add to this horrible situation. She told me about earlier when she had gone to take a shower. She explained that she just looked up and saw a blinking blue light in the vent above the shower. We left in the morning and never spoke any about it again. Honestly, I know we didn't handle the situation well. If it were to happen to us today, there's no way we wouldn't have reported it. But we were young and scared, and we didn't know how to process what was happening. When my stepdad was growing up, his dad was in the Air Force very briefly. When my stepdad was around 5 or 6 years old, his dad was deployed in Missouri, and they lived in a suburb right outside of the base. His dad worked during the night, and his mom stayed home. My stepdad wasn't much of a sleeper at that age, and he usually stayed up until the late hours of the night with his mom. So one night at around 2 a.m., my stepdad was playing in their living room with some yarn, and his mom decided to take a shower. In the living room, there's a sliding glass door that had no blinds and led to the backyard, which was not fenced in. There was also a pathway that wrapped around the neighborhood and cut through the backyards. So my stepdad was sitting on the carpet playing with the yarn when something outside caught his eye. There wasn't a whole lot of lampposts behind the house where the pathway was, but their porch light was on, and that shed light onto part of the pathway. Standing on the lit pathway was a clown holding a balloon. Now, my stepdad knew something wasn't right, because what kind of a person decides to dress up as a clown in the middle of the night and stand on a pathway? He started to yell for his mom. Well, when the clown noticed this, he started bolting towards the sliding glass door, and my stepdad freaked out and started screaming while running down the hallway to the bathroom. He told his mom what happened, and when they went back to investigate, the clown was gone. They called the police, but they couldn't really do anything since the clown was on public property, and they didn't really think a 5-year-old kid could be a reliable witness. The clown never came around again, and my stepdad stopped staying up so late, so he's not sure if the clown came back or not. He's not sure what the clown's intentions were, but to this day, he's terrified of clowns. When I was 17, my parents were in the process of building their first greenhouse. It wasn't very big, but it was functional. We used to grow plants like snapdragon, basil, tomatoes, strawberries, and so much more in there. One shelf of the greenhouse contains the plants that my teenage self was obsessed with and subsequently cared for. Plants like potted dusty millers, potted purple-white pansies, and a succulent. Next to the greenhouse was a little fenced patch of dirt that my mom planned to use for crops once they began sprouting. I've lived near the southern area of the Appalachian Mountains my whole life. Close enough that I'm scared to leave my house at night, but far enough that I'd never personally experienced anything before this incident. I always take my dogs with me when I venture outside, and one of my big dogs always wears a GPS tracking collar because he can and will disappear for hours, and it's terrifying to think that we might never see him again. It's the kind of collar that has an electric field that warns him against leaving the yard. It was about 6 p.m. on an early spring day, so the sun was relatively low in the sky. I was inside the greenhouse watering my shelf of plants. My dogs were much closer to the house than me, so I was basically in the woods alone, as the greenhouse is barely 10 feet from the tree line. As I was caring for the plants, I heard a cracking in the woods. I froze, knowing there was no one else around me. Then this horrible sound began coming from the woods. It sounded like a horse trying to mimic a child's screams of joy. It sounded very wrong, too high-pitched, too scratchy, and it kept looping in this strange way. The sounds made the hair on my arms stand straight up. It was far too close for my superstitious teenage self. I knew the rules of the Appalachian Mountains by heart. I finished watering the plant I was looking at, pretended to check on the others, and deemed them fine. Then I began quietly putting things back where they belonged. The greenhouse was covered in fogged-up plastic, so anything out there would have seen nothing but my shadow. I carefully left the greenhouse, locking the door behind me. I wasted no time in climbing the hill towards the house, not looking back. My dog noticed me and started walking towards me. Out of nowhere, he began sprinting and snarling. It was the first and only time I had feared my dog. He had always been a giant baby, but that day I felt nothing but instinctual terror. Before I could react, he was gone. My dog had disappeared into the woods, and he vanished for 6 days. His collar died less than an hour after he left, even though it had a 48-hour battery life, and I know for a fact it was fully charged that morning. I honestly thought whatever I had heard done him in. He eventually showed back up, and now has a nasty scar through his left eye. The vet told us that it wouldn't interfere with his sight, but it was very noticeable. To this day, he stays close enough to touch me whenever I go near the greenhouses. This happened back when I was a kid. I think I was maybe 10 years old, and it was a long time ago. So I lived with my parents in a pretty busy neighborhood. Most of the houses were not that big, but there were quite a few of them on the street. I remember that on the 4th of July, I went to my aunt and uncle's house with my parents, and then we went back home at night. My best friend Emma lived in the neighborhood a few blocks away. She told me that her family were doing some fireworks that night and invited me to come over. My parents knew this, so that night I walked over to her house. When I got there, she had a bunch of her family over and they were shooting off fireworks and stuff. I stayed there for a while until things died down. Then I left to walk back home. Now, I'm not sure what time it was by then, but I think it was getting late. Even for the 4th of July, the streets were pretty quiet. I was walking on the sidewalk, and a couple of minutes in, this dark four-door sedan started to drive by. But it didn't pass me, it just started going the same speed that I was walking. And I was not walking super fast, so it struck me as odd right away. I didn't recognize the car, and when I looked over, I couldn't see the driver well enough. So I was suspicious right away, and I walked faster and then turned left at the next block. I remember that the car turned left as well at the street. To get home, I was supposed to keep going straight and not take the left turn. So when I realized the car was turning too, I quickly moved back. When I did, the car started to stop. I ran behind the car and crossed the street, and then got back on track on the sidewalk to go home. The car went forward at first, and I felt better. But as I was walking, I heard the car moving and turned around to see it pulling into a driveway and turning around. I walked faster and knew that it would probably try to catch back up with me. After turning around, the car took a left again and was now on the same street as me. It caught back up with me easily and then started driving at the same rate as me again. It was pretty much a straight shot home at that point until one more turn, which was on my street. I walked, just hoping that the car would go away and not knowing what I should do. The car continued to just drive with me. Then, suddenly, it pulled over to the side of the road slightly ahead of me. The stop was very sudden, and then the driver's door quickly opened. I saw a man starting to emerge. He was about average height and thin. As soon as I saw him getting out, I took off running. I was running in the direction of my house still, and at first he started to run after me. I must have been faster than he expected though or something, because after I made it a good 20 or 30 feet away, he turned around and went back to his car. He got back in and then started driving to catch up with me again. I turned at my street and was running as fast as I could. The guy was still able to keep up with me pretty easily with him being in a car. I could see my house coming up ahead. I just wanted to make it there, but then I noticed something good. My dad was outside in the front yard. This made me feel a ton better. I continued to run, cutting through a neighbor's yard and then into our yard. The car continued slowly down the street. Then, once it was in front of our house, it slowed down and I ran to my dad. At that point, I heard a tire screeching and the car went quickly down the road. I told my dad what happened. He walked into the street after the car, but it was long gone. After that, I never saw the car again. I didn't get a good look at the man at all. I couldn't tell you what he looked like other than a very basic description. But I'm really glad that my dad was outside. This is my crazy experience from when I went shopping at Family Dollar one time. I would go there occasionally. It has pretty cheap prices on groceries and things like that. So I went there one day, got a cart, and then started shopping inside. It wasn't too busy. There were a few people here and there, but not that many. I was getting mainly groceries, but a few other items as well. As I made my way around the store, things were going good. Soon I reached the far back of the store. At this Family Dollar, the far back was where the refrigerated and freezer items were. So I was looking through the food there, and I spent a couple of minutes in that area. As I was doing this, I ventured a few feet away from my shopping cart to get something. That's when I noticed something really strange. I saw a man was on top of one of the freezers. These things are like 7 or 8 feet tall, but there's a gap between the top of them and the ceiling. The man had been lying down on top of one of them, almost completely hidden from anybody's view. I had no idea why he had been up there. He wasn't a worker or anything. Was he hiding from someone, or just being weird? After getting up, he stood on top of the freezer and looked around. I couldn't help but stop and watch him. He looked at me, and I asked him what he was doing up there. The man said something, but I couldn't understand him. He had a sort of dirty and disheveled look. Some other people nearby started to notice the man. We stood and watched him now walking across the tops of the freezers in the back of the store. After he made it about even with my shopping cart, he stood there, and then he suddenly jumped down. He jumped directly into my cart. He was too big to land in it though, so the cart tipped over and fell to the ground. It also caused a bunch of my items to fall out of the cart as well. It made a loud noise, and if anybody else wasn't already looking at the man or in this direction, they were now. I was at a loss for words and just stood there in disbelief at what I was witnessing. The man was not hurt despite taking quite a fall. He got up right to his feet and then started jogging away to the front of the store. He went out of my sight, and I didn't know if he was going to leave or what, but I was just glad that he had gotten away from me. I went over to my cart and picked it up, and then I started picking up my items. Some of the nearby shoppers made some comments about what had just happened. After picking my cart back up, I continued on. In doing so, I heard some shouting from the front of the store. The employees were trying to make the guy leave, it seemed. I was really curious at that point, so I couldn't help but make my way a little closer to the front to see what was going on. There were 3 employees near the guy. They were practically begging him to leave the store. The man finally turned and jogged off out of the doors. I watched him go to a car and then get inside and then drive off very quickly. When he was finally gone, I think that everybody in the store let out a sigh of relief. The guy seemed like a loose cannon. I was able to finish up my shopping at that point. I spent maybe another 5 minutes getting things and then went up to the front and checked out. After that, I left the Family Dollar. As I was driving home, something crazy happened though. I first stopped off to get gas, and then I made a quick stop at another store. Then I was actually going back to my house. I noticed up ahead on the road several police cars. There was an officer standing there waving me to the side of the road. I saw another one up ahead holding the spike strip things that the cops use to stop cars. I pulled over, and then I heard sirens behind me as well. I looked back and saw lights. Then I saw a car come zooming up behind me on the road. It was the same car that the guy had gone into. This must be him. He was speeding, going way too fast. He went right past me, and then the cop tossed the spikes, which the man tried to avoid but ran over. And in trying to avoid them, he also lost control of his car and spun out. At least 5 police cars then cornered him in. I watched the man get out, and it was the same guy from the Family Dollar. The police arrested him, and I was able to go home. It was really crazy how I saw the guy again. He must have left Family Dollar only to lead the police on a crazy chase. That was a very memorable trip to the dollar store. I worked the late night shift for a while as an EMT on an ambulance that does both 911 calls and generic transport in Southern California. For this call one night, my partner and I, both females, took a lady back home from the ER. She lived in a kind of sketchy neighborhood, and after dropping her off, we drove down a block away from the known Hooker and Pimp Street so that we could finish our paperwork and clean equipment away from that street. We were parked opposing traffic on a curb in the ghetto suburbs at 1 a.m. I had just finished cleaning, and I was standing at the passenger side with the door open. My partner was seated in the passenger seat, still finishing her report. All of a sudden, we heard a girl's voice from a few doors behind us screaming, "No, no, let me go," while a guy yelled, "You can't take her." My partner and I looked at each other, then down the road, because we heard someone's engine revving like an angry lawnmower. All I saw was headlights coming my way, and I took a flying leap into the cab across my partner's lap as she slammed the door shut behind me. Just in the nick of time, too, because the car came within literally inches of our rig. I'd have been crushed if I didn't have the reflexes to jump in. As the car went by, we saw that a bald, tatted-up Hispanic guy was the driver, and he was just casually flicking a cigarette out the window. In the back seat was a girl in her underwear desperately pounding on the window. Meanwhile, on the outside of the car was a dude in his tidy whities. He had one hand holding onto the roof rack or something, and his feet braced up against the door while he was also punching the window. Not a scene that you see every day. I flicked on the lights and sirens, hoping to scare the driver, and my partner got on the radio telling dispatch a brief rundown and to send cops to our location as we were GPS tracked. The driver was not fazed in the least by our display. He stopped at the four-way stop sign, which was a bit surprising, looked at us in his mirror, flicked the cigarette, and took off. Naturally, we two unarmed females gave chase. The driver was cruising, weaving this way and that, trying to shake the guy hanging on in his underpants. We saw the dude fall off and run after the car, and a moment later the girl came flying out of the car in a very ungraceful tuck and roll. The two took off on foot behind one of those giant power breakers you sometimes see on city streets, while the driver floored it around a corner. We followed around the corner ourselves to try to get a plate number, but alas, he was sporting on advertisements on the plates that a newly purchased car would have. Since he was gone, we presumed that it was safe to get out and do our job and take care of those injured. We hopped out with the aid bag, and my partner kept watch while I ran to the giant power thing, but the nearly naked duo was gone. At that moment, 5 squad cars pulled up, and we gave them the story. They asked where the two were who escaped the car, and we responded that we didn't know. They asked for a description and possible direction, so we told them that if they went left and made another left 3 streets down where they first parked, they might find them. Maybe 5 minutes later, one of the cops radioed in saying that he found them. Here's the thing though, they denied everything. No car, no kidnapping, no chase. They said none of it happened. Of course, they couldn't explain why they were nearly a block away from their place wearing only underwear. They also couldn't explain their lack of shoes or the large amount of road rash all over them. Since technically they didn't do anything wrong, they had no desire to press charges or be treated by us, and they were let go. That was the night I learned some not only scary but just flat out weird stuff can happen late at night. In 2010, when I was 15, I became interested in urban exploration photography. I absolutely loved seeing the beautiful, eerie photos of abandoned shopping centers and hearing about all the awesome vintage stuff people would find at these places. I was originally thinking of going to a famous local abandoned mental asylum. There are many creepy and weird pictures of this place online, and many stories of paranormal stuff happening there. About a week before my best friend Anna and her boyfriend Garrett and I were going to go, I was talking to an acquaintance Selena at a party who warned me off. She told me how she and her cousins went there a while back. Nobody else was there that night except them, and apparently they got horrible vibes as soon as they walked in. While they were exploring upstairs, one of her cousins felt an overwhelming force pulling him towards a room. Just before he opened the door, he fell through the floor and slashed one of his wrists very badly and lost a lot of blood. She said she would never go back there, but if I found a cool house to let her know. Because of that story, Anna, Garrett, and I mostly gave up on the idea of urban exploring. I just didn't think about it for ages until I found an abandoned house one day. I was going for a bike ride and decided to take a different route than my normal one. This one ended up running through this weird little pathway at the bottom of a dead-end street. I kept riding down it until I ended up at this park. I had never been there before and was very disoriented at this point. I was basically lost in my own suburb. Anyway, I rode through this park and tried to find a water fountain. I ended up going through this long path which led me to nothing except this high stone wall covered in dead vines. The stonework on the wall was a unique design, and it just seemed odd and out of place, so I felt the urge to see over it. I stood on my bike, and even then, I was only just able to look over this wall. What I saw was a very, very weird mansion. The garden was overgrown, a sea of green weeds broken only by Greek marble statues poking out. The bottom floor windows were all broken, but I could see that there was black and white checkered flooring and more statues inside. The windows at the top floor were boarded up, except for one that had curtains. There was also a fountain in the garden that was all cracked too. It was the oddest and most out-of-place house I'd ever seen, and my instant urge was to photograph it, but I didn't have my camera or my phone. So I rode back through the park and picked a house number to remember, and managed to make my way back home, even though I got really, really lost. I instant messaged Anna and Garrett as well as Selena, the girl I met at the party. I told them I found this incredible abandoned house and we needed to check it out. My best friend immediately got super excited because the plan was we were going to start a blog and she would write about places we explored and I would take the photos, and her boyfriend was excited because he was super into horror movies and wanted to film stuff. Selena was a bit reluctant. She said that the statues sounded kind of creepy, but eventually she decided she would come. We planned to go on a Saturday night because Garrett wanted to film at night, and we were all scared of being seen by people in the park, so it seemed logical. We met at Anna's house, and Garrett brought his dad's trailer to bring a ladder so we could get over the wall. I was nervous because it hit me that we were breaking in and trespassing, and if we got caught, my parents would flip out and never let me go out again. So we left Anna's house at midnight and made it smoothly to the house number I'd remembered. This is where we encountered our first problem, because I led us down the wrong street, and it took us a half an hour to find the park, and Garrett was carrying this heavy ladder and getting really angry. We finally found the park, and I just remember feeling a bit uneasy. It was very, very dark. No lights in the park or street lights were on, and it was very still and quiet. We found the path and walked down, and sure enough, we reached the wall. We were ages away from the car by now. I had assumed it was quick, but I'd been biking the last time and not carrying a ladder and a camera. We climbed the wall and then sat at the top, pulled the ladder up, and climbed down it into the garden. As soon as we set foot in this garden, I was just filled with dread. I think we all were. The statues were very creepy and human-like. Up close, their faces were just wrong-looking, like features were weird sizes, and they looked really unsettling, like their arms were twisted weirdly. We were completely silent. Garrett was filming, and I was taking pictures. We reached the back door, and it was unlocked. Anna mentioned to us that it was strange that the door was unlocked, and we all agreed, but we went in anyways. Once we stepped inside, we were in this huge empty room filled with objects, clearly statues covered in sheets. Garrett pulled a sheet off one, and we all screamed. It was a Greek statue with a horrible human-like face painted on, grimacing. Selena wanted to leave at this point, and I didn't mind that idea, but Garrett convinced us to check it out a little more. He said that probably other kids had been through there as well, exploring the unlocked area and painted on the statue. We weren't going to split up and walk back through the garden alone, so we continued. We kept walking through the house, and I was shaking too much to take pictures. We passed empty room after empty room, all filled with sheet-covered statues. We reached the bottom of a marble staircase. Once we got to the top of the staircase, it was clear that something was very, very wrong with the house. There were no doors except for one at the end of a hallway, but every room was filled with odd, wrong-looking furniture. Chairs were painted red in a pile in one room, and tables that were too high and painted odd colors as well. Something was really off. We opened a cupboard in one room and screamed at a horrific life-size mural of some sort of bizarre person with inhumanly long teeth and hands. At this point, even Garrett was freaking out. He was like, let's just check out the last room and then get out. So we all walked slowly towards the door. Inside was a nursery which had a black crib with old wooden toys. I can't recall what the toys were, maybe puppets. There were strange paintings of horrifying clowns like the other mural we had seen earlier. We didn't even step inside the room. Garrett said that we should leave right now and that the place wasn't safe. As soon as we all got downstairs again, we froze because one of the statues had moved up against the wall. We dropped our stuff and ran to the door. Garrett had to kick the door open because somehow it was locked now, and we ran through the horrible garden to the wall. I remember that when I was nearly at the wall, Selena just screamed, and we all turned to see a light was now on in the nursery room. We scaled the wall and jumped down, not even bothering to grab the ladder. I sprained my ankle on the jump, but I didn't look back as we all ran through the park. We got into the car, and everyone was crying and covered in cuts and scratches, and my ankle was swelling already. Selena already didn't know us that well, and after that night, she deleted us all off Facebook, and I never saw her again. I had horrible nightmares for a month afterwards, and my ankle has never been the same. Honestly, I feel like we were in the presence of someone or something very evil. This happened to my cousin and I when we were 14 years old. If you were to ask how many times my cousin's parents bounced from house to house, he would just shrug his shoulders. That's how often his parents would move. His parents were a little bit weird, always constantly moving and leaving for business trips. I remember this day like the back of my hand. It was very hot, almost 100 degrees. I used to have sleepovers at his house whenever I could get the chance, and this was no different. I arrived at his house in the early hours of the afternoon, and as expected, his parents were away on a business trip. We opened some of the windows so that we could let the hot air out. Granted, this probably didn't help the case at all and most likely made it worse. We turned on each fan to max blast and went upstairs to play video games on his Xbox. We played for at least an hour or two, and eventually we both got hungry. We agreed to go to the spot that was a 10-minute walk from his house. We got dressed, and before we left, we closed some of the windows. That way, if anybody were to drive or walk by, they wouldn't just hop in through an open window. We ordered our food and quickly headed back home. When we got home, we sat in the living room and watched YouTube and whatnot while we were eating. We sat there for a good hour or two before we headed back upstairs to his room, and at around 7 or 8 p.m., we closed each window as it was getting dark out. Later that night, I was thirsty and decided to go downstairs to get myself a cup of water before bedtime. It was around 10 p.m. at this point and I was getting tired, so I quickly filled my cup and then headed back upstairs. My cousin was already in bed scrolling through social media and whatnot. He eventually fell asleep, but I couldn't fall asleep because of how incredibly hot it was. I'm not sure how long I laid there awake, but sometime later I heard footsteps moving around downstairs. At first, I chalked it up to his parents coming back early from the business trip, but the footsteps kept pacing between one place. I heard drawers being opened and rummaged through, as well as footsteps going between the living room and the guest bedroom downstairs. I walked over to my cousin and shook him awake. After confirming that his parents were not supposed to be home yet, I quickly tiptoed to the door and locked it. Just as I was about to walk away from the door, I heard it. Footsteps coming slowly up the stairs as if they were trying to be quiet. I knew my cousin heard it too because as soon as I turned my head to look in his direction, he was already quietly turning to the window to unlock it. We were trying to lift it up, but the window was so old that it wouldn't budge. We were grunting as quietly as we could, but it wasn't quite enough. We heard the doorknob trying to be turned, but it obviously was locked. I think this angered the person on the other side, because when they saw the door didn't budge, they started kicking and ramming into it. Now that the clock was ticking, adrenaline kicked in, and we finally got the window open. I yelled at my cousin to go out the window, and he leaped down onto the grass. It was my turn now, and I peeked my head over the edge and saw the fall. It had to be about 10 to 20 feet. Suddenly, I heard the door being opened. I didn't think twice and just threw myself out the window. I landed on my arm and backside. We looked up and saw a man with long, messy hair and his eyes wide staring at us from the window we had just jumped from. We quickly got up onto our feet and we bolted to the neighbor's house where we used their phone to call 911. Police showed up minutes later and investigated the house. They searched every room and every hiding space there could be, but the man was nowhere to be found. He was already long gone. Later, I found out from paramedics that I had sprained my collarbone and bicep. Thankfully, nothing more serious than that. The police took information regarding what happened and took a description of the man. My cousin and I both assumed that when we left to go get food or whenever we went downstairs and before we closed the window, the man simply just climbed through and hid in the basement. He must have been waiting until we fell asleep to rob us, or maybe worse. This story takes place back when I was in college. I attended a large university that was a couple of hours from where I'm from. I had lived in the dorms with my roommate Rachel the previous year. The two of us decided to rent a small college house together for that upcoming school year. We were able to find a place that was cheap that we could afford, but it didn't come with any furniture, so we had to get some. Mostly we would look on Craigslist for either free or really cheap furniture. After getting the lease for the house in June, we got a couple of things over the summer. At one point, close to the start of the school year, I still needed a desk and was looking around Craigslist. I found one that I really liked, and it was also really cheap. So I reached out to the seller via text and let them know that I was interested. The seller responded, asking me several questions which I found odd. He asked for my name, age, and why I wanted to buy the desk, and he made it clear that his price was not negotiable. I figured that he was just super organized or something, and I had no interest in negotiating either. I mean, the desk was like $20, so it was already a good deal. I texted him the information, and he texted back saying that his name was John Smith, which also seemed odd. I mean, that kind of seems like a fake name to me. Anyways, he said that I could come by and buy the desk the following evening between 7 and 9 o'clock. He also said that he would help me bring the desk to my car. It was a pretty large desk, and I had cleared out the back of my SUV for furniture I got. I told John Smith that I would just bring my roommate and it would be fine. He said no, not to bring her, and that it was no problem for him to help. This seemed strange to me as well, which only made me want to bring Rachel with even more. So I told her about it, and she agreed that it seemed sketchy. I should have just forgot the whole thing and not got the desk, but it was a really nice desk and I wanted to get it. I was young and dumb, and I felt that nothing would go wrong. So the following evening, we drove to the address that was provided. We got there shortly after 7 o'clock, and it was a fairly average-looking neighborhood. It was maybe 10 minutes from campus and was pretty quiet, with many houses that had fairly large yards. I texted the owner, John Smith, that I was there. He told me to go inside the house and that the couch was inside. Rachel stayed in the car, and I told her that if I needed her help, I would let her know. I walked up to the front door and knocked. John Smith opened it and told me to come in. He appeared to be in his 60s, had a mustache and a sloppy-looking beard, and smelled like cigarettes and beer. I walked inside the house and was inside of the living room. I did not see the desk there, and John Smith informed me that it was in the basement. This made me want to leave immediately. If he knew he was selling it, why would he not at least bring it upstairs? I was annoyed but said okay. He claimed that he was sorry and that he just forgot to bring it upstairs. He said that he also needed help bringing it up the stairs. So against my better judgment, I followed him over to the basement door. He opened it and it revealed a staircase going down to an unfinished basement. It was really dark down there with not much light at all. This only made me more nervous. The man started walking down the stairs and I followed him. Down in the unfinished basement there were some boxes and junk scattered around, but overall not too many things. When we got to the bottom of the stairs, we then walked a little ways into the basement. I looked around and finally I spotted the desk that I was buying. It was completely backed against the corner of the basement far away. This was odd because the listing for the desk showed it being in a room with natural light. I remembered that, so it had to have been upstairs. The man then started walking away. Not towards the desk though, but towards the stairs. He then started to walk up them. I was confused and also really nervous. As the man was making it to the top of the stairs, I didn't know what was going on. And just then, I heard a sudden knocking from the front door of the house. It had to be Rachel. The man stopped on the stairs and looked back at me, and in an angry tone asked, "Who's that?" I was speechless in the moment, and without me even answering, the man quickly turned back and walked up the rest of the stairs and left the basement. I followed and quickly went up the stairs and made my way to the main floor. When we both got back upstairs, the man walked over to the front door. I was trying to quickly go over there as well. Sure enough, Rachel was standing there at the door. She was still knocking on it and knocking rather loudly. The man opened up the door and angrily asked her who she was and what she wanted. Without letting her respond, he told her to leave. Rachel said she was my roommate, and I walked over and went past the guy. He angrily yelled at me and said that I was supposed to come alone. I didn't want to argue with the guy or anything. I just quickly walked past him, and Rachel and I then ran through the guy's yard and back to the car. He was yelling and cursing at us the whole time. Then we left and drove back home. By the time we returned, the Craigslist listing was deleted. I still made a report to Craigslist about him though. I'm guessing that John Smith was not his real name, but I do have his address. I never heard anything more, so I don't know if anything was done about him. I guess technically he didn't commit any crime, but it was sure as sketchy as can be. The fact that he wanted me to come alone was a major red flag. I should have never gone there, and I'm glad that Rachel came to the door when she did. She told me that she just had a bad feeling about it, and it seemed to be taking a long time. So she decided to just knock on the door and see how it was going. But when nobody answered the door for a while, she started loudly knocking. Thankfully, it worked. I worked at a Dollar Tree for a while, years back. I think I worked there for about 6 months. For this story, I'm just going to say that my name is Jennifer, even though it really isn't. When I worked at Dollar Tree, I was mostly a cashier. One night, this creepy guy came into the store. I'd been working there for a few months to that point, and sometimes I had to close the store by myself. The store didn't typically get that busy, especially later at night, so I was working by myself this time. The reason I say the guy who came in was creepy is because that's the feeling I got right away. He walked in and sort of looked around with these weird eyes. He went into the store and shopped around for a bit, and I stopped paying attention to him. Then he eventually got to the checkout. I remember that he only got a couple of things, I think some energy drinks and something else. When I was scanning his items, he asked me out. It wasn't a very polite or gentleman way to do so either. I was not interested, not even slightly. But I still wasn't going to be rude because I was working at my job, and I was also by myself with this creep at night. The last thing I wanted to do was tick him off, so I tried to politely decline his advances. He kept persisting though, and I made it clear to him that I wasn't going to change my mind. He asked me when I got off of work and when we closed and that sort of stuff. Even after he had paid and I gave him his receipt and stuff, he still wasn't leaving. Finally, after I still said no, he walked off. At this point, we may be closed in a little over an hour. I continued working. A few other customers came in here and there. We never really got that busy though. It was pretty easy work for the most part, but then the man came back inside the store again. The same creepy guy who had asked me out before. This gave me a pretty bad feeling because obviously I did not want to see this guy, and he had just been in here, so what could he possibly want now? The man walked in, and instead of shopping or anything like that, he walked directly up to me. He acted like me telling him off had never happened. The guy asked if I was off of work yet, and I said no. Then he said that he would be waiting for me, which really creeped me out. Now, in this moment, there were 2 other customers inside the store, and I knew that. So I got a little brave, feeling like the man wouldn't try anything stupid, or if he did, there were other people who could possibly help me. I told the guy not to wait for me. I said, "I'm not interested in you, pal. I don't want to go out with you, and I'm just trying to finish my shift, so leave me alone now." The man then said that he was going to find out more about me. Then he walked away and left. I didn't know what he meant by that, but I was glad that he was gone and I had made my message clear. For a few days, I didn't see him. Then, another night when I was at work, he came back. This time, he walked into the store again pretty late and came right up to me. When he did, he said, "Hello, Jennifer," and said my last name too. We did have name tags at the Dollar Tree, but I hadn't been wearing mine the last time I saw him, or this time either. I had lost mine a while back, and I had always forgot to wear it when I had it anyways. The manager of our store didn't seem to care too much if we wore them or not, so I didn't know how this guy knew my name. I asked him to leave again, and surprisingly he did. He just turned around and walked out with this creepy grin on his face. I had been prepared for him to give me a hard time. For the rest of that night, he didn't return. Later that night, I got off of work and drove back to my place. I lived in this little townhouse that wasn't very nice. About an hour after getting back from work, there was a knock on my door. I went over to the window and looked out. I obviously wasn't going to answer right away with it being nearly midnight. I saw the same guy there. Now he knew where I lived. I was so creeped out that I called the cops right then and there. The man didn't leave though. He tried opening the door. The first door opened, which was the screen door, but the other one was locked. He knocked on that door again and waited. Then I heard him saying, "Jennifer, I know you're home." It was so creepy. I just stayed inside waiting for the cops. The entire 10 minutes that it took them to get there, the man stayed right there on the step. Then when the police got there, they made him leave. He didn't do anything they could arrest him for apparently, but he was harassing me. He left after they told him to, so that was that. But I was sure to tell them about my job, and we were able to get him trespassed from the Dollar Tree. So if he ever did come back, he would be arrested. Thankfully, he never did. Back when the killer clown sightings were a thing, my friend and I decided to have some fun. I have no idea how many clowns dressed up scaring people were real killers or just people trying to spook someone, but my friends and I were some of those in the category that were bored and just wanted to scare some people for fun. Say whatever you want about us, we knew it was overall a dumb idea and that it was generally not nice, but we never hurt anyone or even got that close to people. We live in Texas and would travel to various parts of the state on weekends under the guise of just going out to hang out all night at each other's houses. During one of our final scares, we got involved in something that could have turned violent. Along some back roads, there's a local spot and area where couples go to drink, mess around, and all that jazz. We were going there to see if we could spook some couples. When we arrived, there was just one couple standing outside a red pickup truck. A big blonde guy and some redhead girl, probably 2/3 his size. They were arguing very loudly, and we didn't jump out of the woods to scare them yet because it was getting heated. Basically, to sum it up, she was telling the guy that it was over, and she was going to call her friends to pick her up so she could leave. Me and my crew were hiding in the trees when the guy basically punched her down on the ground. He started beating her and screaming things like, "I won't ever let you leave." Despite being idiots for the whole clown situation, my friends and I were not the type of people to let a woman get beaten like that. So we ran out towards the guy, basically screaming and waving our hands in the air like freaks. Seeing a giant group of clowns run at you is a scary sight, and so the guy ran away. He got into his car and just drove off as fast as he could. The girl booked it too. She was crying and screaming for help and running away from us. Fearing the cops may come, we left. As we turned away to go back to our own truck, One of my friends pointed towards the spot the guy had forced the girl onto the ground at. My heart sank at that very moment when I saw what he left. It was a Bowie knife. We guessed he dropped it in a panic to get away from us. We drove out of there, and we had no idea what happened to the ex-couple after we left. All I know is, that night, our clown antics could have possibly saved someone's life. My girlfriend and I love to take late-night walks. One summer night, we decided to go to this beachy area near my house in the Netherlands. It's not really a beach at sea, just a large lake with a beach next to it. I love to go to this spot to have fun with my friends, and it's a very common place for people from my city to swim there in the summer. There's a bar and a terrace where you can order food and drinks and everything. Normally, this is a very chill spot. At least that's what I thought until one night a few weeks ago. It was just around 10:30 and we had just watched a movie. As I said, we love to take walks, so we did that after the movie ended. First you must walk through a small bit of forest, but nothing scary. It's just a normal asphalt road, and there's a small cabin nearby where people live. As we approached the beachy part, we sat on a bench and just chilled there for a while. We stood up again and walked farther along the water. We were just walking and went past a few tents along the way, as people love to go camping there. As we approached the end of the beach, we suddenly heard a loud manly scream and cry coming from the distance. It sounded like somebody who was having a proper mental breakdown. As a normal reaction, my girlfriend was freaked out, and so was I. We took a 180-degree turn and walked straight back. Every 5 to 10 seconds or so, we heard the manly cry and screaming, which echoed over the entire lake. About 500 meters from where we first heard it, we figured that we were far enough away to try to sit on a bench again. Suddenly, we heard it again, louder this time, and it was coming closer. The screams and cries kept on coming closer to where we were sitting, so naturally we took off running towards the asphalt and road again. In between the beach and forest is a large open field. We stopped running and started normally walking as the crying became fainter as we were moving farther away. But every time we stopped walking, it kept coming closer. We figured it was walking on the same road that we were. As we walked faster and faster back home, I took one last look back, and suddenly I saw this tall figure wearing all black stumbling out of the shrubs and small trees along the road. The screaming and crying were something I've never heard before, and I've never actually seen somebody produce that type of a sound. Only something you would hear in a horror movie. The figure then stopped walking and just stood still in the middle of the field, still crying. We sprinted as fast as we could back to my house. Once we entered the more populated area, we saw a man cycling towards us, going in the direction of where we had just come from. I decided to inform him of what we had just seen and heard, and he also responded with a 180-degree turn and cycled straight the other way. A few weeks later, and I still can't get the sound out of my head. I first thought that I should go towards the figure to see if I could offer my help, as it didn't sound as if it was having too much of a good time. I didn't want to take the risk, as it could have been somebody who could cause serious harm, was on drugs, or maybe had weapons on them. If it was just a sad someone, I hope they're alright, but they really creeped out my girlfriend and I that night. This happened 2 years ago on the 4th of July. I have a sister who's older than I am, and she's married with a son who's my nephew. He was 4 years old at the time of this story, and I always like to spend time with him, and he calls me his favorite aunt. I'm also his only aunt, but that's beside the point. So he wanted me to take him to the 4th of July parade in our local city that we live in. It's always a big deal, and it goes down Main Street and a couple of other roads. My sister and her husband live within a walking distance of the parade route, and it took place on the morning of the 4th. So I arrived at my sister's house, and her husband's parents were there visiting. Going to the parade was just me and my nephew, so we left and walked to the parade route. We found a place to sit down along the side of the road on the edge of the neighborhood. The parade started shortly after, and it was a pretty good turnout. My nephew enjoyed it, but at the end, something strange happened. Most of the people in the parade were the typical things that you would see. Towards the end, I remember seeing this clown walking around by himself. It seemed normal at first, but then it kinda didn't. He was just walking around, looking at people, and he seemed a little bit out of place. He was not a 4th of July themed clown either, just a regular clown. When he got close to us, he walked over real slow. Then he walked directly up to me and my nephew. He gave my nephew a high five, and then he went up to me and gave me a hug. It was awkward and I'm not sure why he did, but I still figured that he was just being a friendly parade clown at that point. He kind of walked off then. After that, I remember about 5 minutes later noticing him again. He was walking back the opposite way of the parade traffic. He appeared to just kind of be wandering around. Soon after, the parade ended. I didn't notice the clown and the people started leaving. As my nephew and I were now getting ready to leave though, I noticed the clown once more. He was walking back from far away and heading in our direction. I wasn't sure exactly what he was doing. Nobody was talking to him or anything, but a few people were looking at him. We left the area and started walking back on the sidewalk to my sister's house. The pace that my nephew and I were walking was pretty slow because he's only 4 and he didn't want me to carry him, so I was just going at his pace. When we made it about to the next street over, I noticed the clown again. And now it was just us and the clown. Nobody else was on this street. He was at the far opposite end of it, just slowly walking around. We did not have to go down this street, but we just had to cross it and walk past down the sidewalk basically. It was weird that we saw the clown, so we kept going, and I was hoping that he would not follow us or anything. By the time we made it past the street to another one, the clown was still walking towards us, and closer. I was starting to get a little concerned because it seemed weird. The way the clown was walking was like he was just wandering around. We continued down the sidewalk, and the clown ended up following us. We finally made it back to my sister's street, and now the clown was walking behind us only about 50 feet back. None of us said anything. I hurried up, and at this point picked up my nephew and carried him into the yard, and then we went inside. I looked back, and the clown was still walking towards us, but he was in the middle of the street. I felt much better after getting inside though. After my nephew rejoined his parents and grandparents, I was curious, and I went to a front window. I looked out, and I saw that the clown was still there in the middle of the street. He was just standing there and looking in the direction of the house. It was so strange that I decided to go tell my sister and her husband about it. Her husband was out on the back patio grilling. When he got wind of it, he decided to go see for himself. Now, this was really weird. My sister's husband is a fairly big guy. He's over 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds. He's not a mean guy, but could look intimidating to some people. He walked out into the front yard, and the clown did not move. He asked the clown guy what he was doing, and the clown just waved at him, but did not move still. So my sister's husband walked to the end of the yard, now like 15 feet from the clown, and the clown guy still didn't move. My sister's husband was telling him to leave, and he was just ignoring him. I couldn't believe that the clown was staying there. Then my sister's husband got like right in his face. He still didn't move. My sister's husband put his hand around the clown's shoulder and started kind of leading him away. They walked like 5 feet, and then the clown randomly took off running, sprinting to the end of the street and out of sight. My sister's husband came back, shaking his head, and said that he thought the guy was crazy or something was wrong with him. We all went back inside, and thankfully that was the last we saw of that creepy clown. I have lived in the Appalachian Mountains my whole life in the thick woods. Growing up there felt like stepping back in time. We had endless expanse of forests as our playground and our imaginations as our guide. My best friend and I would spend hours exploring the dense woods behind my house, following animal tracks, climbing trees, and discovering hidden creeks. In autumn, when the leaves turned and fell, clearer paths would be revealed, and we would push a little deeper each day. We generally always stayed close enough to my house in the distance though, since that was our parents' rules. One day we wanted to go farther and thought of a setup to do it. We brought twine and other supplies that day, winding it around tree trunks so we'd find our way back. We kept walking deeper than we'd ever gone before, until we reached a strange old tree that split in two, like a giant slingshot rising from the ground. Right next to it, half hidden in the hillside beneath a pile of leaves and branches, was a rusty handle. As we brushed away the leaves, we realized it was attached to a heavy wooden door embedded in the earth, clearly being there for a long time. My friend and I both tugged on the handle, and the door finally broke, revealing steps leading down into pitch blackness. The thrill of finding something new and cool was so high that we didn't even hesitate before going down there with a flashlight. When we reached the bottom, we found ourselves in a small, cramped room. We think it was just an old bomb shelter or something. In the middle of the floor was a single worn photograph. I held it up to our flashlight, and we saw the photo was of 2 children, both girls, standing in front of an older version of my house. The outside of the house and surrounding yard looked a little bit different, but it was the same house that my family lived in. We put the photo back down on the ground where we found it and eventually headed back up the stairs again. When we reached the top, we looked around, but our path of twine was gone, as if someone or something had unraveled it. We blindly ran back through the forest, finally reaching my house. We burst through the door breathless and wide-eyed, my parents immediately noticing that something was wrong. We explained to them that we had gotten lost in the woods, but we also talked about the door and the photograph of our house that we had found. My dad was curious to see this place, and he convinced my mom to come with also. With my parents in tow, we spent a while retracing our steps through the woods, following what we remembered of the path. We never once saw any pieces of our twine we had set up earlier, but we did finally spot the twisted, slingshot-shaped tree which was near the door. We all went down the stairs in the bunker-like room again, but when we got to the bottom, the photograph from earlier was nowhere to be seen. We looked everywhere, but to no avail. That day still gives me the creeps, considering there had only been a 2 or maybe 3 hour gap between the visits to the shelter, and the photograph had vanished in that short amount of time. I had just started a summer job where I was basically a custodian cleaning the classrooms in preparation for the upcoming school year. My dad worked for the town's district, so he was able to get me this job. I was the youngest one there, as I was only 20 at the time, and there were a handful of people who worked with me. They were usually off doing other tasks like waxing the floors and whatever else they did. The school was completely empty besides the staff who were cleaning. Things were going fine for my first couple of weeks. For the most part, I was on my own, wiping down desks and cleaning while listening to music. It was nice, and I enjoyed not having someone with me all day telling me what to do. A few weeks had gone by, and I finished cleaning a couple hallways. It was time to move to the basement where the robotics and woodworking classes were. When I first got down there, I noticed a light was peeking through under the doorway of one of the classrooms. The windows of the classroom were covered with shades. I found this odd since it was summer and nobody was in the building normally. I walked over and peeked in the door window. The lamp was on at the desk, but no one was inside. I proceeded to knock, but no answer. After turning the knob, I realized that the door was locked, so I used my key to open the door. I decided to scope out the room. Maybe somebody had forgotten to turn the lamp off. I disregarded that idea when I noticed the computer at the teacher's desk was on. The screen looked weird. I'd never seen this layout before. The website was all black with red writing on it. It also had a chat box. I didn't have time to see much more than that because a sudden voice came from the doorway. It was the woodworking teacher returning from the bathroom or something. I realized I had been caught looking at his computer, so I stammered through the conversation, saying how I was just cleaning the classrooms and I didn't know if anybody was in here. He told me that I could skip his room since he would be woodworking all summer, and he said that sawdust would get anywhere anyway, so there was no point in cleaning it. As he said this, he walked over and sat at his desk while closing the browser. Less cleaning was fine by me, so I went to leave the classroom. But before I left, he brought up that he was doing a petition for more funding for the arts and woodworking department. I agreed and signed his petition. The petition required a full name, phone number, email, and address, and there were only 2 other people that had signed it so far. I had never signed a petition before, so it all seemed normal to me, so I just added my information. I went on working for the rest of the summer, and would see him around the hallway by his classroom every now and then, but I never talked to him more than just a hello as we passed by each other. One day, the boss let everyone out early since it was almost 100 degrees. I got home and decided to hang out with some friends. It was a group of us, about 5 or 6. My boyfriend's brother joined us at the time, which was unusual since he's not really a social person. He's really into technology, so he's always on his computer, which he built by himself. He's also good at hacking and stuff like that. Anyways, on this day he told me that he needed to talk to me and it was serious. I wasn't close with him at all, so whatever he had to tell me, I felt like it would be legit. He brought me into my friend's living room and pulled out his laptop. To my surprise, he was on the deep web, and he went on to show me that I was up for bid on the dark web. I knew how the deep web worked. I had heard horrible stories about it, but I'd never been on it, so how would my information even be out there? It suddenly clicked though. The web page matched with the one that I saw in the classroom about a month back. I had also given my information to that teacher for his petition. I explained this to my boyfriend's brother. He advised me to call the police immediately, which is what we did. They did an investigation on the teacher and found the activity on his computer. Not only that, but he had several other girls' information along with pictures. Some of the girls were minors too. There were also wooden contraptions they found in his home, which he had made in the shop. He probably planned to use them on these girls, or even me. I was disgusted, but relieved that he was caught. I often wonder what would have happened if the page was never discovered. Would he have kidnapped me and killed me online? I changed my phone number and moved since that incident, but I learned to be more careful with who I give my personal information to. I work a graveyard shift as a security guard for a recycling yard. When I was new to this job, only my second week of working there, I was given a good scare one night. Basically, every hour I make rounds across a giant recycling yard covered in various precious metals that are broken down and sold. During my shift, I scan various checkpoints and ensure nobody besides me is in the yard or facility. One of my other tasks is to go through some grassy and bushy terrain and over a set of train tracks to take a photo of a warehouse far across. This is to ensure that it is safe and clear. I use a flashlight with 2,000 lumens, so I can see my way through pretty much the entire yard. Well, that one night during my second week, just an hour in on my first round, I went through the grass and over the train tracks. I took the picture of the warehouse and submitted it. Suddenly, I got this intense feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on my neck stood up and I froze. My flashlight was still on and pointed at the warehouse. I slowly turned around and pointed my flashlight behind me. About 10 yards away, I saw a skinny, old, wrinkled white man with a large white beard sitting on a chair. He was looking directly at me. He had dirty jean overalls and I think a Western-style cowboy fedora hat on. Under the overalls, the only thing I could see was his bare skin, no other clothes. Now, I'm a 6 foot 220-pound man, but he scared the crap out of me when I turned and saw him. I screamed at a pitch that was probably embarrassing, and I accidentally dropped my flashlight out of shock. Mind you, there were thin, tiny metal shards literally everywhere on the ground where I was standing. I couldn't see anything now as the flashlight was facing away from my sight and not towards the man in the chair. All I heard was a quick pace of shuffling and the clanging of metal from footsteps quickly running towards me. Once the metal-crunching footsteps were within maybe 5 feet of me, I heard them quickly veer to the left and past me. Within 3 or 4 seconds, the metal clanging was gone, followed by the faraway sound of rustling bushes. I finally, carefully to avoid cutting myself on shards, grabbed my flashlight from the ground and pointed it towards the sound. The old man was gone, past the bushes to who knows where. I was shaking from adrenaline and fear. I managed to catch my breath and called several emergency contacts. When they arrived, the old man was long gone. I believe that maybe he was just there to watch the active trains move across. I say this because the metal chair was facing the tracks. It's still there and I took a photo of it, kind of as a memento to remember the time an old man scared the living daylights out of me. I've not seen the old man since, but maybe he still comes and sits on the chair, but is more careful about it. I grew up in a rural area dominated by cornfields and old farmhouses. My friend Richard worked on his family's dairy farm since he was a young kid, so I spent a fair amount of time hanging out with him around the farm during the summertime for summer break. His grandparents lived in the original farmhouse on the property, which was built sometime in the mid-1800s. It was a large brick house with 2 chimneys and was painted white. It was in fantastic shape, but it felt old inside. Richard and I were feeding calves one evening when we noticed a yellow glow coming from the attic, and I asked him what it was like up there. He looked up from the calves and squinted at the attic light before saying, "I've never been up there." He pulled out his cell phone and called his grandfather to tell him he left a light on in the attic. His grandfather told him that nobody was in the attic today. Old people forget stuff all the time, so we weren't that worried by what his grandfather had said. When we were done working, we went into the house and into the attic for 2 reasons. One, to turn off the light, but also to check the attic since we were going up there and had never been there before. The door to the attic was small, maybe 3 feet tall, and had a deadbolt keeping it closed tight. When we walked through the door and up the narrow steps, we found ourselves in a huge space. The attic had nice wooden floors, 4 large windows, one on each side of the house, and was dimly lit by 3 exposed light bulbs hanging equidistant across the ceiling. The lights were off, which was weird because they were on when we walked in the house. So Richard hit the switch at the top of the steps and the bulbs lit up. That's when the confusion started. The lights were bright white, like fluorescent white, the kind of light bulb where it almost feels blue. It wasn't a yellow light that we had seen from the barn. We looked around and saw some old gas light fixtures that probably hadn't been touched in decades. Gas didn't even run in the house anymore. 2 of the 4 gas lamps were warm. Turns out the attic used to be a suite back in the late 1800s. The eldest son lived there, and the plan was for him to take over the farm. You can see marks on the floor from where his furniture used to be. The son apparently passed away in the attic, but we couldn't find proof of that anywhere. The gas lights being on ended up being one of those weird, unexplainable things. When I was 18 years old, I was living with my parents, and it was the summertime. I had just finished my first year of college and didn't really have any money. I was looking for a summer job, but having a hard time finding one. My parents were divorced, so I would live with my mom most of the time, but would stay with my dad for a few days here and there. I remember that I really wanted money, and I decided to go on Craigslist to see if there were any odd jobs that I could do. They have a job section on the website for both temporary and permanent jobs. Most of the temporary jobs are things like yard work, projects, or helping people move, things like that. I saw one that seemed really easy. The ad simply said, "Watch my house when I'm away." I clicked on the ad to learn more, and to be 100% honest, my instincts told me right away that it seemed a little weird. There were a couple of pictures of the inside of this house, but not much information was given. However, what was given was the price that the owner would pay, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was pretty good. It was 2 nights staying at the house and watching it for probably like $400 or something. I responded quickly because it seemed like easy cash. The only thing I would have to do is live in some random person's house for 2 days and then get paid good money. The house didn't look super fancy or anything from the pictures, it just looked pretty average. I texted the owner and said that I was interested in the job. After texting back and forth for like 10 minutes with the guy, he said that I could have the job. So a few days later, I went to his house. I didn't tell either of my parents, and I was staying at my dad's at the time. I told him I was going to a friend's for a couple of nights. My mom was way more strict than my dad, and I know she would have asked a bunch of questions, but my dad just said, "Cool, have fun." I knew my parents would not have let me do it if I told them, but I was thinking that it would be fine, and I really wanted the money. After I got to the address, which was like 15 minutes away, the house looked pretty average. In fact, if anything, it didn't really look that nice. The neighborhood had a decent amount of houses, and it seemed pretty quiet. I knocked on the door, and a man answered whose name was Jerry. He was like 50 or so, and said that he was going out of town for a few days. The only instructions he gave me were to watch the place and to stay there and sleep in the guest room. That was it. He didn't have any pets or plants, so I wasn't sure why I had to watch the house. Maybe he just wanted peace of mind knowing that somebody was there and he had the money to pay for it. Then he gave me a set of keys and left. It seemed kind of weird, but it was all right with me. The house was kind of small and not that nice. It had just 1 level, and then a basement which I didn't bother to go down and look at. There was a living room, dining room, kitchen, bathroom, and 2 bedrooms. There was not a whole lot of furniture either, but enough to be comfortable. I sat on the couch in the living room and went on my phone and watched TV. I looked around a little bit in the kitchen and there was basically no food, so at one point I went out and got some. I came back and continued to just relax on the couch. I was still there when it got to be late at night. Aside from the TV, it was very quiet. I was not used to it being so quiet because both of my parents have pets and I also have siblings. So as I sat there on the couch, about to go to sleep at like 11 p.m., I suddenly heard what sounded like somebody in the basement. It was footsteps walking around down there. Right away, it really spooked me. I didn't know what that could possibly be. I was too scared to go down and investigate. I got up from the couch and just stood there, but the noises seemed to stop after that. I stayed on the couch listening and watching the TV to take my mind off it. The noises were really not that loud, but it definitely seemed like somebody had been walking around down there. After like 10 minutes, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they started coming up the stairs. There was no mistaking it this time, because I heard the creaking of the stairs as they walked up. I was terrified. I got up and I ran into the guest bedroom and shut the door. I listened close, but I didn't hear anybody walking around anymore. This was too weird, so I texted the owner. I didn't care if I was bothering him so late at night. It was creeping me out so much that I was literally about to just leave and go home. Surprisingly, the owner texted me back pretty quickly. I had told him that I thought I heard someone in the basement and I was really creeped out. He told me that was just his roommate Carl. This made me really confused. He had not mentioned at all before that he had a roommate living in the basement, and if he did have a roommate, why would he need somebody else to watch the house? I sat there thinking about it for a minute. but I decided that perhaps he didn't like his roommate or was afraid that his roommate would steal his stuff or something. I was just trying to make sense of it in my mind. So I left the bedroom and walked around the house. Nobody was there at all. I did not go in the basement though. I figured that Carl was down there. I didn't hear any more noises from the basement either. I guessed that Carl must have gone to bed. So then I went back to the guest bedroom to try to go to sleep. I felt better at that point, and after a little while was able to fall asleep. However, I awoke sometime later. I knew that it was still the middle of the night, and I was suddenly wide awake. I didn't hear anything, but I looked around. All the lights were off, but when I looked to the doorway, I saw it. Jerry, the owner of the house, was standing right outside my bedroom door and looking at me. As soon as I saw him, he quickly moved away. There was no mistaking it though. I knew what I saw. I was so freaked out, but I didn't know what to do. I ran over to the door and closed it. Then I turned on the lights. I heard a door closing in the distance, but I don't know which one it was. After not hearing anything for a couple of minutes, I decided that I was getting out of there. I gathered all my things, ran out of the room, and left. I didn't see or hear anyone in the house as I did. I drove back to my dad's and got home at like 4 a.m. The next morning I told my dad that I had just gone back early from my friends. I figured he would freak out if he heard what happened. I was just glad that I made it out of there okay. And I never got another text from Jerry at all. I realized that he probably never left. I don't think he had a roommate either. I think Jerry was the person who I heard in the basement, and he made up the story about having a roommate. The Craigslist ad was gone when I looked back online. I stayed off of Craigslist after that. Those events scared me from using Craigslist, and I've stuck to real jobs since then. This happened to me and my friends over 10 plus years ago on the night of my 14th birthday party sleepover. The backstory is that my parents at the time had a garage on our property that they had partly renovated. It had walls and a bathroom, but still had the garage door that rolled up that wasn't completely sealed, and there weren't any curtains on the windows. They were letting us use the garage when we had friends over to hang out in. We never really had any issues on our street. It was the kind of place where you didn't really lock your doors back then. Up until the day of my birthday party, my parents had let my brothers stay in the garage, but I hadn't been allowed to have friends sleep in there overnight yet. Being the incredibly mature 14-year-old girls that we thought we were, I pleaded with my parents to let us have the sleepover in the garage rather than in the living room. My mom was skeptical, but my dad agreed since it was my birthday. After a long day filled with sugar and driving my parents crazy, we finally got ready to have the sleepover in the garage, with strict instructions that we were to go to bed and lights out by 11 p.m. Also, it was my responsibility to ensure that the garage roller door was locked from the inside. I locked the door and we settled in for a night of more sugar and TV. At 11 p.m. we turned off the lights, but we couldn't sleep, so we decided, as teenagers do, to have a game of hide and seek with the lights off. We were about 3 rounds in, and my best friend was it. I was hiding half behind a cupboard that was beside the roller door. Everyone was giggling, and the first person got caught, and then I heard the giggling coming from behind me. At first, I thought it must have been an echo, because there was no way somebody had managed to find a hiding place behind me with me against the wall and door. Second person was caught, and then there was more giggling coming from behind me. Now I was freaking out, and being the idiot that I was, I didn't want to spoil the game, so I quietly moved to a different spot facing one of the windows. Now it was dark outside, but the moon was bright so you could see the shadows, and that was about it. It was completely dark inside the garage. I was concentrating on not being found when I saw a shadow pass by the window and stop. Now I was sure there was someone outside, but I thought it might be my dad or my oldest brother about to catch us not in bed, so I froze. My best friend ran straight into me and started laughing. I quickly shushed her and said that my dad was outside and we needed to get back into bed. We quickly grabbed the other girls and quietly got back into our beds, thinking that we had all avoided getting in trouble and we didn't hear my dad saying anything. I turned over in my bed, but the shadow hadn't moved. By this time, I was majorly freaking out. The shadow moved away, and then there was scratching on the garage door. This time, the other girls had noticed. We all started to quietly panic, and we all got into my bed hoping whatever it was would go away. The knocking on the door started, and more giggling coming from outside. We freaked out, but didn't scream. I had just gotten a phone for my birthday, but it was over in the house with the rest of my presents. So, with no way to quietly call my parents, we yelled at whoever was outside to go away. Cue more giggling and then banging on the windows. We could see the shadow and it was big, so it would have to be a grown man or a big teenager. We threw a mattress from one of the beds up against the window so they couldn't see us, but he went to another window. We decided to hide in the bathroom with the door partially open so I could see out. The garage door started to rattle and bang like it was being forced open. He had never stopped giggling. I gave up at this point and gave out the loudest scream that I ever had in my life. The other girls started to scream too, and the garage door stopped making noise. We crept out and saw the lights on over at the house and my dad running out to us. At about the same time, a car started and took off from the side of the road. We didn't get there in time to see what the car was before my dad was opening the garage door with the key. He took us all into the house, and my mom calmed us down and finally got us all to sleep by letting us sleep together in the room with a king-size bed. It was another 2 years before I could sleep in that garage again. Any sleepovers had to be inside the house. My friends and I were so freaked out that we didn't want to sleep out there again anyways. This was a creepy encounter I had a few years ago. A couple of years ago, my buddy and I were bored one afternoon, and we decided to explore an abandoned house that I had spotted earlier that week when I was out on a drive. We live in a town that's mostly suburbs, but if you drive 5 minutes north, it's all country roads, farmland, and forest. The abandoned house I spotted was in the middle of a field. There wasn't a paved road or gravel driveway that led up to it, so we parked as close as we could on the side of the road and walked through the tall grass to reach it. The house looked very old, most likely built in the early 1900s. There were plants engulfing the entire home, and part of the roof was missing from what looked like fire damage. It had obviously been abandoned for some time. My friend told me that he was going to hang back when we came close to the house. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, and he said that he was getting bad vibes. I decided to keep going though, because I already walked out to it and I wanted to see it. When I reached the house, I looked in through the windows and saw lots of weather damage and signs of neglect. The door, however, was locked. I walked around the perimeter of the house and found a cellar door unlocked. I entered and slowly started walking down an old wooden staircase. I got about halfway down and squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The only light source was the sunlight coming in from the open cellar door. It was full of old belongings, furniture, and junk. Then, in the far right corner, I saw what looked like a figure standing in the darkness facing me. I had a terrible feeling. It was a tall person just standing there straight with their arms at their side. I couldn't make out what they were wearing or any facial features. I stood there for a few seconds staring back at them in shock. I thought that they had to be playing mind tricks on me. I squinted harder, trying to make out if what I was seeing was actually a tall figure, when it suddenly moved slightly and made a deep grunting sound. I panicked and ran up the stairs as fast as I could. When my friend saw the look on my face when I exited the basement, he started running towards the car. He said it looked like I had seen a ghost. When we drove away, I kept looking back to see if we were being followed, but nobody was there. I haven't been back since. I live in a small, quiet city. My girlfriend and I were 18 and 19 when this happened a few years back. We used to walk alone at night all the time, either from my house to hers or the other way around. It always felt safe. You'd hardly see anybody on the streets after a certain hour, which we liked. One evening, just as it was starting to get dark, we decided to walk to her place from mine. We were joking and talking about random stuff. At some point, she suggested that we take a different route just for fun, since we always walked the same way, and I agreed. We kept going for about 15 minutes or so when we realized we didn't really recognize the area. I remember saying, "Wait, this isn't the way home, is it?" And we must have just taken a wrong turn somewhere. Right then, we heard a loud whistle, a clear one, how somebody whistles when they're trying to get your attention. We turned around and we saw a clown. His clothes were kind of torn. In one hand, he held 3 balloons, and in the other, a big butcher knife. At first, we honestly thought it was a prank or somebody filming a video. We had never seen anything like that in real life. It just felt like out of a movie. I didn't know what to do, so I just said, "Hello, how are you?" I was half laughing, but he didn't answer. Instead, he started whistling a children's song and began slowly walking towards us. That was when we panicked and ran. The thing is, no matter how far we ran or how many turns we took, somehow we'd see him again, either around a corner or across the street. Whenever we turned to look, he would always be walking, like he didn't want us to see him running or something. We didn't see anybody else. The streets were dead. It was getting darker and the streetlights hadn't come on yet. After running for a while, we found a spot behind some trees and just hid. I think we stayed there for at least half an hour. We didn't hear anything. No footsteps, no whistling, just silence. Eventually, we decided to try to find our way back. We were way off than where we thought we were. It took us a bit, but we figured it out. We calmed down a little, though we were still kind of looking over our shoulders. Then, just once more, we saw the clown. He was standing on the sidewalk, back turned to us this time, still holding the balloons and the knife. He didn't see us, and we kept walking until we were back at my girlfriend's house. Later, we figured it had to be a prank, some guy trying to scare people. But about a week later, we saw something on the local news. Someone had been attacked by a man dressed as a clown not far from the area we saw him. They weren't seriously hurt, but the police hadn't caught the guy either. After that, we stuck to our usual route, and we did not see or hear the clown again in our town. This happened last year. I was very curious about what the deal was about this dark or deep web stuff. So I went to YouTube to watch a tutorial on how to access the dark web using Android, and I planned on surfing the dark web using my phone. Everything was set. I covered my phone camera with tape, went to my room and locked it, and opened the Wikipedia site for dark web links. Everything was cool, and I went to those normal chat sites where I didn't contribute and just observed. I gained some confidence and opened this one creepy anonymous confession site. My faith in humanity vanished away after reading some of the confessions there. Some people commented about people they killed, while others commented about how they tried to kill someone and failed and how they regret it. There was a ton of other graphic things which I honestly don't want to mention. After about an hour of browsing other stuff, I got bored, so I decided to stop, close everything, and delete all the browsing apps I used. I had trouble sleeping for a couple days, but after a few more days, I went back to feeling normal again. I was using WhatsApp to text my friends, and then I got this notification that someone texted me on WhatsApp. It was an unknown number, an international number, and I opened the text not thinking much. I saw this creepy text which said, "Why are you ignoring me?" I got a little tensed as I don't have any friends from abroad, and maybe it was a scam. I ignored it, and the next day I got another text from the same number that said, "You can't ignore me. I'm still here. You can't run away." I was now sure that the number was most likely from the dark web. I figured that they had my phone number, and it wouldn't be hard for them to get my address either, and I was worried for my safety. I quickly blocked the number and told my close friends about what happened about the dark web. One of my friends said that the same thing also happened to him within the last year when he surfed the dark web. He said that he blocked the numbers soon and started getting creepy, deadly calls. He had to change his phone number to stop hearing from them. The next day, I got another text on WhatsApp from another unknown international number. It said, "Why did you block me?" I quickly blocked that number, reported it, and deleted WhatsApp along with all my other social accounts. The next week, I got another text from an unknown international number to my phone number directly, so I did end up having to completely change my number and get a new phone. It ended up being an expensive experience for me, and if somebody offered me money to surf the deep web again, I would never do it. This happened just last year. It was the 4th of July, and I had a few people over at my place. My wife and I live in a place that has a backyard up against the little woods. We also have a patio back there, and it's a nice place to hang out. Some friends came over, and we had a fire. They brought their kids, and we had some sparklers that the kids were playing with. When it got late, everyone left, and my wife and I cleaned up and then went inside. Shortly before going to bed, though, I was passing by a back window. I noticed a light coming from what appeared to be just inside the woods. It looked like a sparkler. At first, I thought that maybe it was a neighbor, but the woods back there is pretty large and thick. The neighbor's backyard is not that close and not visible, so why would they be in our woods with a sparkler? This was very weird. I kept watching it. I couldn't tell who was holding the sparkler at all, but somebody definitely was. I kept watching for like 5 minutes, and it was moving slightly, but I just couldn't tell, so I decided to go outside. I walked over and opened the sliding glass door and then stepped out onto the patio. When I did, I saw the sparkler a little bit better. It then started moving. Whoever had it was walking in the woods fairly quickly and across the width of our backyard. I yelled at them asking who was out there, but got no response. They moved faster and then went out of my sight completely. It was weird, but I went back inside. They were 100% on our property and in our woods. For what reason, I didn't know. I looked out again before heading to bed and didn't see anything. So then I got ready for bed, went into the bedroom, and laid down to fall asleep. Our bedroom is at the back of the house and has a window that looks out to the backyard. As I was trying to fall asleep, I heard my wife say, "What is that?" I opened my eyes and looked up. In our window was a sparkler right outside of it. Somebody was holding it, no doubt, but I couldn't tell who. I got up and told my wife that this guy has been here before. I told her to stay there and I would go investigate. So I left the bedroom and then walked out of the room. I ran to the back door again, opened it, and left the house. By the time I got out, though, the only thing I saw was someone running off into the night. They had gotten rid of the sparkler, which had been put out and was now laying on the ground below the window. I picked it up and took it in. It was the same sparklers we had, but I had put ours away. So did this person grab the sparklers from our party when it was going on? Or did he get them as we were cleaning up? Or did he bring his own sparklers? It's really bizarre, to be honest. After that, though, he never returned, whoever he was. I'm hoping that it was just some kid playing a prank, but I think he took things a little too far if that was the case. This story is not super creepy, and at the time I wasn't that concerned about it, but years later I do find it weirder than I did at the time. This happened when I was 16. One night my parents were out and my brother had a friend over for a sleepover. I sort of knew the guy. He was a couple of years older than me and seemed nice enough. I briefly talked to him when I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water, and then returned to my bedroom where I just sat on the bed. I was watching a movie on my laptop. The lights were off, and I had my headphones in and didn't really pay much attention to my surroundings. For some inexplicable reason, I looked up from the screen and I noticed a shape sitting on the floor. I don't know why this didn't freak me out. I was kind of tired and not thinking straight, so I simply switched on the light and spotted my brother's friend cross-legged on the floor grinning at me. I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but mainly because I was wearing very short shorts and my bedtime attire. His eyes wandered all over my body and I just stared at him and said something like, "I think you're in the wrong room." He was still grinning and said that he just popped by to say hi. Maybe I felt a tad bit flattered to get the attention of an older guy, but I just shrugged it off and I ended up chatting to him about nothing specific for like 10 minutes until my brother came in. He was looking angry and told his friend to get out of my room. The next morning I bumped into him again as I got something out of the fridge. He appeared out of nowhere and stood right behind me, smelling my hair. At that point I was still not creeped out, as he was obviously trying to flirt with me. I didn't flirt back, mainly because I didn't know how to flirt anyway. However, I kept getting prank calls from then on. Somebody always called the landline asking for me, and when I said hello and asked who was there, I only heard heavy breathing. Until one night when the voice responded and said something very inappropriate to me. Maybe the guy didn't realize, but I recognized his voice immediately. It was my brother's friend, so I hung up. I was too embarrassed to tell my brother about it, thinking that he wouldn't believe me. The prank calls stopped after a couple of months, and my brother finished school, moving to another city and losing touch with that friend. I casually asked my brother about him one time, and he told me that the friendship fizzled out because he was acting like a pervert and had been accused of something terrible by a 14-year-old girl from their school. I think I was too naive to recognize a predator back then, but now I do. I was 12 years old and it was summertime. My family was renting a red zone Victorian-style house, and it was at the corner of our neighborhood. Our house acted as the symbol line of where the safety of our neighborhood started to deteriorate. Across the street from us was a tiny white house that seemed to constantly have people moving in and out of it, and it would sit empty for months at a time. On this particular summer night, it was just me, my mom, and my two sisters home. My dad worked third shift, so he was gone, and it was about midnight. All our bedrooms were upstairs, and my older sister and I were still up. My mother had been reading in her room. My mom called me to her and asked if I could turn the air down. Since it was an old house, the only thermostat was downstairs, and it was very finicky. It would usually take about 3 minutes long of additional button pressing to get the thermostat to kick on after you adjusted it. I went down the stairs and immediately heard shouting outside. I peeked out the window on our front door and saw a small white truck parked outside. It was across the street with people swarming around it carrying cardboard boxes loading up the truck bed. All the lights downstairs were off, so I wasn't worried about them seeing me through the large glass door. After I watched for a minute, I decided it was shady behavior, but nothing unexpected from that creepy house. I turned around and walked into the dining room that was connected to the living room where the thermostat was located. The thermostat was on a wall that was hidden from the front door the way the doorway jutted out. I had been leaning lazily against the wall waiting for the air to kick back on for about a minute when I saw a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision. I peeked my head around the doorway into the living room and saw 3 men standing on my front porch. One had his hands cupped around his eyes, peering in our front door. One of them was walking back and forth on our porch, sizing it up, and the last man was peering through one of the 2 large windows looking into the living room. I immediately threw myself back against the wall so they couldn't see me, and I was paralyzed with fear. I remember being convinced that they could hear my heart beating through the front door. I realized they had probably seen me from across the street when I was watching them, and were probably drugged up enough to be dangerous. Meth was a huge issue in my town at the time, and looking back they were probably involved with that scene based on their behavior. I could hear them fiddling with the doorknob and our decorative mailbox at the front door. I was panicking because the only way to get back to the stairs was to walk through the living room. I waited for probably 3 minutes, and they finally walked back across the street. As soon as it was clear, I bolted upstairs and got to my mom. I ran to her, calmed down enough to explain what happened, and then pulled her downstairs. But the white truck peeled out of the neighborhood right as we looked out the window. The house across the street had yet again been abandoned, and we moved out of our house about 2 months later. I still think of this story a lot, and I think of it as an adult, so it hits much harder than it did even back then. I feel like as a 24-year-old today, I would have been even more scared than 12-year-old me was. About 10 years ago, I was leading an archaeological survey in the Appalachian Mountains. It was a survey for a proposed pipeline or transmission line. I really don't remember which at this point. We planned to do the entire line in 6 days, but the middle of the line would put us 2 hours from the nearest town. We decided we would just rough it and camp out along the way. On the afternoon of day 3, miles from a road or any other semblance of civilization, we spotted a bus. An old yellow school bus just hanging out on this mountain ridge in the middle of nowhere. My first thought was that it had to be something to do with drugs, maybe a meth lab or something. After looking at our maps, I realized that we were going to have to pass right by the bus. I decided I would scout ahead before we got any closer, figuring if anything seemed off about it, we could regroup and come up with a new plan. I approached it, and nothing seemed too out of the ordinary, other than the fact that it was a bus in the middle of nowhere. But then I saw it. People. There were people on the bus, just sitting there, completely still. I almost immediately turned and ran when I realized they were way too still. I mustered up the courage to get a little bit closer. They were mannequins. A dozen or so mannequins sitting on the old school bus in the middle of nowhere. At that point, I was thoroughly confused, but I thought that my crew would be safe enough to spend the time there needed to survey this thing. Maybe a little weirded out, but we would be fine. But then I noticed something else. There was a rainbow-colored pile of something next to the bus door. I couldn't see how this situation could possibly get any stranger, but upon closer inspection, I found that it was a pile of about 2 dozen sex toys. Most had been chewed on by animals, but I could still tell what they had once been. I made the decision to mark the whole area around the bus as untestable, and we hightailed it out of there. We didn't start working again until we were well past the bus, and I made sure that that thing was no longer even visible in the distance before we set up camp that night. It was 2015 when I was still doing some freelance work, and I was hired by a client to do some improvement to her personal blog. One day, I noticed that the security plugin inside the blog popped up a new alert that the file had been changed. So while checking that, I saw a new administrator account inside the blog which wasn't there about 12 hours ago. I called her on Skype and asked if she gave anyone else access. I was a bit unhappy because new people tend to screw up my workflow. What she told me next was shocking and disturbing. She got a call from her bank account that somebody tried to purchase something using her card, around the amount of $3,000. It was denied because of some authentication error. Her PayPal account sent out almost $1,200 to 3 separate accounts. She got an angry email from a friend who received an email from my client with some slurs in it. Some of her clients left her because of some similar mail that was sent from her email ID. I had heard stories like this before, and I had an idea of what was happening. I gave her an idea of what was going on, and she gave me remote access to her PC. The first thing I noticed was that there were a good number of processes running in the background that didn't come from anything. I tried multiple antiviruses, but it didn't do much. Her personal email ID was hacked, and that ID pretty much had every account she regularly used connected to it, like her Facebook, Twitter, bank, and credit card. I told her to reset everything. It took almost a week to find out the full length of the damage, and she lost around $2,000, which was never recovered. The backstory was she was curious and heard from a friend about the dark web and Tor and downloaded a file from someone inside Tor. She never told me what the file was advertised as or that it was a malware. It sent a lot of data from her computer, and they pretty much had access to her computer. About a month later, when she had left this tragedy behind her and was getting back on her feet, somebody sent her an email with some private photos. The photos were private photos of her and her boyfriend, and they demanded a good amount of money to keep them private or they would leak it online. She was already depressed and going through a rough patch with what happened earlier, so this was the last straw. Her boyfriend was a good person and he supported her through all of this. Her boyfriend was able to really help her out, and she contacted authorities and certain steps were taken. She never paid the blackmailers and none of the photos ended up being leaked. Nobody knows why, but I'm glad they weren't, and I'm glad she's okay now. A couple of years ago, I was looking for a new car. I looked on Craigslist because I feel that they usually have the best deals. You have to shop around and look for sometimes a couple of weeks, but eventually you can get a great deal. So I found one car that I thought might work for me. The price was good and everything in the ad seemed legit. It wasn't an eye-popping great deal or anything, but it seemed like a very reasonable listing. I texted the owner and said that I was interested. We met up one of the next days. I think we met in a store parking lot somewhere nearby. So after looking at the car, I wanted to take a test drive to make sure that it drove well. The owner was this guy, I think his name was like Jeff or Jordan or something with a J. But anyways, he was tall, kind of thin, had glasses and really dark hair. He asked if I wanted to go for a test drive, but then he wouldn't let me drive it. I went around to go to the driver's side and he told me no and told me to go to the passenger seat. So I went around and got in there, and I guess that he wanted to show me that the car ran well. However, he didn't want me to drive it for some reason. So we left the parking lot and began driving down the road. I figured maybe he was just overprotective about his stuff. But this guy started to drive really far away. At first, I didn't realize because I was trying to pay attention to how the car ran. I was more concerned that he might be trying to scam me or something because he wasn't letting me drive. Soon though, we had been driving for like 10 minutes at least, and he hadn't turned around or anything. He seemed like he knew where he was going. Like he wasn't just casually driving around and making random turns nearby the parking lot. He was pretty much just going straight down this one quiet road. We got farther and farther away, and he wasn't saying anything. I told him that we could go back now. The guy said that he wanted to show me how good the car was. I said, I can see it's good, you can take it back now. He said just 1 second, and then kept driving. We drove in silence for the next couple of minutes. After a while, I couldn't take it anymore, and I asked him to turn around, and he said just a minute again. I waited, and still nothing. This was starting to feel really sketchy. I told him that I wanted to go back now, and he completely ignored me. I didn't know what I could do though. He was driving way too fast to just jump out of the car, and I could not try to fight him. I'm a woman who's barely 5'2", and this guy was about 6 feet tall and probably a lot stronger. He turned at one point and went down another random road. This one was also very quiet, and then he kept driving down it. I took out my phone and had no signal. Thanks, T-Mobile. After driving for about another 5 minutes, I saw something up ahead. It was a police car on the right side of the road. I'm not sure if he was trying to pull over speeders or what, because there were no other cars or people nearby. It was just a cop parked on the side of the road. As we approached the cop, I knew that we were going to drive right past him. I tried to roll my window down, but just when it started to go down, it stopped. I realized that the guy driving had disabled my window. Then he rolled it all the way back up. We were getting closer to the cop. Right before we got to him, I started frantically waving to the cop like crazy. I hoped that he would notice. When I did, the guy driving told me to stop and started cursing at me. He tried to grab me and we swerved the car a little. After we drove past the cop, I looked in the mirror and saw the police car start to pull out. Then the blue lights went on. I felt a huge wave of relief. The guy driving asked me what was wrong with me and why I did that stuff. I told him that I just wanted to get out of there. The man pulled over and claimed that he did nothing wrong. But this so-called test drive had been going on for like 30 minutes, and a whole 20 minutes after I told him that I didn't want to go any further and to turn back. After pulling over, a police officer came out and approached us. He asked what was going on and why I was waving frantically and if everything was okay. The guy driving quickly started talking and said we were on a test drive and that I was acting crazy for no reason. I said that I just wanted to get out of the car and leave. The man said no. It's funny how suddenly now he was talking, but when I was asking him to turn around and stuff, he was either completely ignoring me and not talking at all, or just giving basic small responses. Anyways, the cop said that the man was not allowed to hold me against my will, and the guy finally let me out of the car at that point. I explained to the police officer what happened, and he ran the man's ID. Another police officer was called to the scene. In the end, they sadly ended up letting the man go. They gave me a ride back to my car though, and made sure he didn't follow me. Then I went back home. I reported the guy to Craigslist and haven't seen him since. I also haven't gone back on Craigslist since then. This story happened when I was 18. I had just gotten my driver's license and I was out driving around. My county in Massachusetts is nestled in the Appalachian Mountains and most of the towns are down in the valley. I decided to take a drive up to the mountains since I had just got my license, so why not? I drove up into this small farm town with maybe a population of 50 people. I decided to head to one of the local ponds that's known to always have moose there. As I got closer to the road where the pond was located, I was driving mainly on dirt roads that didn't see much, if any, traffic. I saw a random truck pulled over on the side of the road. It was a brick red colored Ford Ranger from the early 2000s. It was pulled over in an odd spot, so I figured the driver was probably broken down. Of course, I figured that there wasn't cell service up in the sticks, so I pulled up behind them to see if they needed help. As I began walking towards the truck, I got this weird feeling. It was neither a bad or good feeling, just something I couldn't really explain. As I walked past the rear bumper, I heard it. Bang! A gunshot. My first instinct was to duck down since I wasn't sure where it came from. Then a thought entered my head. Was there a driver in the truck? I quickly ran up to the driver's side window and saw a horrible scene. The driver to the truck had taken a large revolver, put it to his head, and pulled the trigger. I saw a terrible scene. I had never seen anything like that before, so this was a nightmare situation for me. I felt lightheaded and dizzy. The driver's window was cracked open about an inch, and as I was looking, it hit me. The smell. It wasn't a rotten or foul smell. It was a metallic mineral smell. I couldn't process what I had just witnessed, and I began to cry and get hysterical. After a minute or so, I did the best I could to collect my thoughts. I pulled out my cell phone and had 1 bar of service. I called the police and told them what had happened and what I saw. When they asked for my name, I decided to hang up. I couldn't be there any longer, let alone continually recap what I had just witnessed, so I left. I waited on the main road in a church parking lot where I could still see the entrance on that dirt road. About 20 minutes later, 3 police cars and an ambulance all raced up the hill and turned onto that dirt road. As they all turned down the road, I put my car in gear and I left. I immediately went home. My parents were away on vacation, and I had the house to myself. I must have taken 7 showers that night to try to escape that smell, the metallic smell that reeked of death. It took me a solid 3 days before I got any sleep after this. I looked at the newspaper every day for the next 2 weeks and saw nothing about the incident. I don't know who the man was or why he did it. I only wish I'd gotten there 5 minutes earlier and maybe it could have been avoided.